Hello, glad to see you on my channel. I really value it. And today I want to share with you a wonderful story. It's a dramatic story that will come as a total shock to everybody. It is a really amazing story. So enjoy watching it.
The fact that John had died was not news to the villagers of Barrow, because in recent years everyone wondered how John, with all his ailments and his age, which had already passed his 9th decade, could continue to walk in the village. But no one rejoiced at John's death, and there were no indifferent people, because John was known as an odd old man, but soulful, with humor and great life wisdom. He appeared in Barrow in the early 90s, and having bought a vacant house in the middle of nowhere, in fact even some distance from the village, he announced to everyone that he was going to farm. They waved their hands at him. However, what kind of farming is there? Who are you going to sell these potatoes and other bits of the vegetable garden to? But John was a man with ingenuity in addition to his weirdness, and soon, having made greenhouses with his own hands, he began to manage, and somehow things went uphill for him. It turned out that despite the difficult, ambiguous time in the city where John traveled with goods, there were hunters, that is, buyers for what he could offer. It would seem, who would be surprised by garden strawberries? But John offered strawberries of white color and yellow, and even some strange berries, clearly of overseas origin, and it turned out that all sorts of newly created rich people with great pleasure ready to buy up such a thing. In general, John didn't talk much about his business, but in the village there was no way to hide anything from the public, and they saw him at the market in the city. People shook their heads. John was a quick John, lucky, but what berry is there in winter? But it turned out that by the winter John had managed to build an annex to the house, like an additional kitchen, and even with his own hands assembled a smokehouse and began to cook fish there. He bought the catch from local men and smoked it according to special recipes to make a delicacy, again for sale in the city. And in the spring John bought the land from the former state farm and planted all the carrots, beets, and some other vegetables, found someone to sell to in town. Berries again began to grow more according to science, and not only his own forces built greenhouses, hired workers, so he became a farmer. In general, the locals at first looked at him obliquely simply because of the social difference, because, well, the smartest one. But then John gained everyone's respect. First of all, he helped the villagers. He could easily borrow money from him in hard times. However, John had X-ray vision and never gave money to anyone who wanted money for a bottle. Secondly, he helped the local school with repairs and also cleared the local pond, which turned from a puddle into a small, pretty lake, on the shore of which you could now have a picnic and sunbathe. No one knew exactly how much John had from his farming, but they guessed that it was a lot. However, no one could understand what he actually spent the money on. In general, at first he spent decently, and it was clear that he restored the house, which had 2 floors and which, as they used to say, was built in the middle of the last century, so that here for civilized, so to speak, rest, could come big people from the city. But since the middle of the 80s, the house had been abandoned, and by the 90s, it was in a sad state. John took care to make it look decent again, but people could only see how he decided to do everything outside, and few people knew what was inside, because John did not like to receive guests. John drove an ordinary Volga as long as he could drive. He dressed simply, and even so that if they did not know who he was, one would think that he was a poor man. It was also known to everyone that John was lonely, and there were a lot of versions about it. Some said that John orphanage, others assured that the matter here, of course, in conflict with the family, maybe even involved in it some unhappy love. In short, everyone could only speculate why he was such a loner. So John lived quietly. He conducted his own affairs, and then he died. The doctor said it was an easy death, just a heart failure in his sleep. So what do we do now? Leslie asked. She was John's closest neighbor and knew him a little better than anyone else, because in recent years, as a single mother with 2 girls aged 6 and 12, she survived by working part-time for a hermit farmer, going to his house 2 or 3 times a week to clean and cook. And naturally, everyone was curious about the private life of a non-human. On this occasion, Leslie and a fellow from the village, Carlo, had a conversation. It was a couple months before John passed away, by the way. "He's like Baba Yaga's hut there," Leslie's youngest daughter Emma once said when they talked about the neighbor. Her mother gave her a light, almost caressing slap on the back for pedagogical purposes and told her not to talk nonsense or she'd be banned from reading bedtime storybooks. "It's just an ordinary house." Imagine even no expensive appliances. The refrigerator is Buryusa. The oven, well, the stove is ordinary. In general, everything is simple. Well, what do you want? She waved her hands. Many, by the way, millionaires and even billionaires live modestly. Here, I saw that even on the subway can ride the subway and walk in torn socks. Why do they earn money? Asked Carlo. Well, maybe he spends it on charity, suggested Selena, Leslie's eldest daughter. He likes to say that good must necessarily win. What does he mean by that? Carlo didn't understand. How should I know? Selena shrugged her shoulders. Sometimes he thinks about it and mutters to himself. In a word, a nutcase. Carlo summed it up. But I'm curious, where does he put his money? Probably saving up. I've heard of pathological hoarding. Carlo was not well liked in the village because he was the kind of guy who came to visit and every time asked to be fed. He was also the kind of guy who could work but didn't like it and was lazy. Though talented, and he was also a joker with a tendency to dream, but never finished any of his ideas. Disliked Carlo, but considered his character overall harmless because he did not drink in his life, because he was allergic to alcohol. They also felt a little sorry for Carlo because he was raised by a father who was a bitter drunk. Carlo's mother died from drinking bad alcohol when the son was 4 years old, and then the boy was orphaned. His father died from the same alcohol, but not directly, just fell asleep in a snowdrift. It happened that year, in the spring of which Carlo was scheduled to graduate. It was only by some miracle that he did not fail at them, and now he intended to go to the city to learn, to become a sushi chef, a car mechanic, a builder. Carlo himself had not yet decided, and for this inarticulate character he was expected to be unemployed and eventually a village fool. But Carlo was not offended and could skillfully defend himself, putting the interlocutor in his place by giving the example of all sorts of great people who achieved something only after 40 years so. However, still no one wanted to take Carlo seriously. Naturally, John's death promised to create a lot of problems, in the sense that it was all interesting and unclear and what will happen to all of his property. And then suddenly it turned out that on his bed under the pillow old man kept an envelope on which was written, "To open in case of my death." The doctor opened the envelope, then looked around at the villagers who had dropped by the house as neighbors, attracted by such news as the appearance of an ambulance in John's yard. "There's this," said the doctor. "A will?" Harvey asked. "No. It's an appeal to all the people of Barrow Village. I've come across this before." The doctor waved his hand. "I've never come across it before." "Well, read it then, please," Harvey exclaimed. "Me?" The doctor rounded his eyes. "You're the only official person here." Harvey scratched the back of his head. "How did you even get in here?" The doctor opened and closed his mouth. "I called it a U-dope," Leslie sobbed. "I looked in on John, and we agreed that I'd clean the windows today. And, oh, woe is me, I was going to make soup today, with brisket as he liked it," and the woman cried. "Please pull yourself together," the doctor tried to cheer her up. "Any relatives of the deceased?" "No," Leslie blew noisily into her handkerchief. "There was one. You see, it's in the letter. Anyway, you better do it," and he held out the letter to her. Leslie took the envelope, tore it open, and pulled out a notebook, written in John's handwriting. She began to read loudly, without hurry, and clearly so that everyone could understand. It turned out that John had made a will, which was kept at such and such a notary. He specified his name and address. He specified that he wanted his property to go to a particular person in the village, and that it was. "Oh," Leslie hiccuped, began to settle on the wall, and did not fall down only because she was picked up by Harvey. "It says that he gives me the land, and the equipment and the house. Everything for farming." "Oh my God. Oh, fats. Oh." Just in time, an angry hiss behind her, but Leslie didn't notice it. In general, there were quite a lot of people stopping by the neighbor's place. Not because deaths were rare in Barrow, no. Here these sad cases happened according to the statistics common for villages and towns. The fact was that John was a very attractive person. The envious phrase was Maria's. This 45-year-old woman had not the best reputation in Barrow, because she drank so much that she could not see the white selenium, and she took men to her, so to speak, looking for a husband and changing them too often than it would be decent, even for the most desperate single woman. Maria had long ago not worked anywhere. She was fed and mostly drunk by her roommates. At the moment her date was Frederick, a former sawmill worker fired for absenteeism and attempted theft. These characters were disliked in the village so much that they were not even allowed to borrow anything from the store, and they had to go to the neighboring village for whitewater, yellow beer, and smacks. The saleswoman told them, as soon as you come for normal products, and not bloody liquor, so I'll start serving you. What do you want here? One of the neighbors pushed Maria out of the crowd of villagers. Go on. John wouldn't want you at his funeral. You're a disgrace to Barrow. So, you're the Harris. The doctor sighed. Will you take charge of the funeral? Of course I will, Leslie nodded. We'll do it properly. Poor John. All alone. And how? Why? Why should I? Why should I? The woman repeated in shock. I never thought of it. I was just helping. Okay, citizens. The doctor shook his head. Who has nothing to do with all this? In general, you would not crowd. Now we need to take it out and take it to, well, you know. Once John was in the village cemetery, the villagers piled the place of his repose with flowers. Almost everyone came. Except, as they said, the soulless ones like Maria. On the day when they said goodbye to John, the weather was such that one could think that late fall decided to turn back and gave way to summer. The sun was warming. The wind was rustling quietly in the crowns of trees. At the spontaneous farewell ceremony at the Pogos, everyone had something good to say about John. They remembered his eccentricities. Do you remember what he did on Evan about 10 years ago? Steve turned to those who had come to the wake. Steve was one of the country laborers who had been working for John all those years. Steve appreciated his bosses because John paid his workers generously, so generously that you could feed your whole family and still have some left over. In general, as Steve thought, you could not be surprised that the old man did not have riches, so paid his salary. And even if there was a reason, let's say a person went on sick leave, he always financially supported. And no one took it as a handout, no. They knew that the farmer did it out of the goodness of his heart, if a person had problems. I remember. Pulled his hand up. He was a schoolboy, Harvey. We used to go to the river then. We listened to my grandmother's tales. She was still alive then. Anyway, we heard tales that the mill there in the old days was cursed and mermaids were there, coming out and catching people at night. Oh, we had a lot of fear. I didn't care about fairy tales then, Steve grinned. I'd already settled here. I remember a neighbor knocked on my door. There was one, Catherine, remember? Well, she went to the city and became a teacher. All those standing around nodded, and Steve continued. I remember she knocked on my window and told me that she had a daughter, Lizonka. She was about 9 years old at the time. She, the fool, ran away to the dam. I was afraid she drowned too. But when John appeared, many of the villagers remembered this story. The kids made a fire on the shore and started scaring each other with tales of evil. And then someone suggested to call the waterman himself. In general, crowded on the shore and began to howl, calling, throwing into the water caramels with taffy to lure the evil. And then suddenly the bushes rustled, crackled, and children rushed scattered thought. Mermaids on their souls came. But it was John who chased the kids away from the river, waving nettle bunches. He drove them all the way to the village, and there the young mermaid seekers rushed to their yards. And no one scolded John for such a performance, because it was even good for the children, and then the children were peaceful. Not forever, of course, because children tend to forget things quickly. Yes, the old man was strange, Steve sighed, but he was a good man. Let's remember him. The next day, Leslie went to John's house. She had to clean it up, sort things out. Then, during the week, she was going to go to the notary to start formalizing the inheritance properly. She still couldn't believe she was so rich. And she was a little afraid because Leslie had never been in any business and did not know how to approach farming. Therefore, although she knew that 6 months would have to pass before she could dispose of everything, but she thought in advance that perhaps she should sell it all to some real businessman, and there already, put the proceeds, of course, in the bank and on interest, and taking slowly, daughters to raise, to learn to raise, so that there was a start in light for her beloved Emma and Selena. To make things go faster, Leslie asked to help Harvey and also called Steve. The latter agreed willingly at home. Steve lately tried not to be at all, and it was about his wife. The man had married for love, but then it turned out that they did not suit each other. He would have divorced long ago, but his son Grishka was born, and now, of course, it was impossible to think about it. So Steve tried to pretend that he has a family, everything is normal, but sometimes it did not work. Mom, I will not do anything. pouting her lips and folding her arms across her chest, stubbornly declared the eldest daughter when Leslie said that she too would participate in the sorting out of things in John's house. "And you have no right to force me." "You're so mean," Leslie told her. "Well, if that's the case, go home." "Wait," she added in a slight tone before her daughter could gallop away happily. "Do your homework, wash the dishes, and sweep the floor. By the way, I have to peel potatoes for dinner." "Well, Mom," Selena rolled her eyes. "Don't mom me here," her parent wagged her finger at her. "I won't let you do nothing, you lazy girl." In general, when Leslie went to John's house to work part-time, she usually left her daughters at home. But sometimes she took them with her and they would sit quietly somewhere in a corner, the older one with her smartphone, the younger one with a book, while Leslie was doing chores. "Mom, can I help?" Emma was jumping around like a little goat. This little girl was always happy to help, and Leslie encouraged such enthusiasm in every possible way, hoping that Emma would grow up to be a good hostess. "May I, my sunshine, my clear star?" She stroked her daughter's head. "What a clever girl she's growing up to be. You see the shelf with the books on it. You take off one by one and put them on 2 stacks, understand?" My daughter nodded. "Put children's books where you see pictures in one and all the other books in the other. We'll take them to our village library later. John would like his things to continue to serve people." "When are we going to dismantle Baba Yaga's hut? Can I help there too?" "Daughter?" Leslie splashed her hands. "Well, what are you saying? I do not understand. Where did you get this from? Where do you see a hut here?" "There," and the child pointed with her pen at one of the walls of the house. But there was no door there, just a wall. Next to the wall was a huge antique chest of drawers. "You're confused, Star," Leslie said affectionately, but she had goosebumps running down her spine. Because one day, once she was working in the yard, she had to weed a small flower bed and take care of the plants. Then Leslie remembered that she'd forgotten to ask John what kind of fertilizer he gave the flowers, so she went back to the house. She entered the room and found John moving the dresser for some reason. The old man turned around sharply and his eyes were. For some reason he looked angry, wild, frightened. But it lasted only a few moments, and then he was as friendly and sweet as ever. Leslie decided that in general that all seemed to her. Well, why did the man move the dresser? And the look? So he was probably scared that she crept up unnoticed. And now my daughter was saying that there was another room behind the wall. So there must be a door. And where is it? Where is it hidden? Leslie did not like the way of thinking. "There is," Emma exclaimed stubbornly. "Remember the pies you made for Grandpa? With cabbage, onions. You told me to stay out of the way and I left." Leslie remembered something like that. "I thought you were playing in the yard." "I was walking around the house first," the girl said. "I came here and there was a door. Open. The door is small. It was made for a baby. I looked inside. And there, apparently invisible and all scary." Emma waved her hands. Steve, who had hitherto been wrapping the dishes from the sideboard with newspapers and stacking their boxes neatly, was distracted from his occupation. Carlo, who, coughing from the dust, was stacking old tulips, had also turned all ears. Leslie felt cold goosebumps dancing anxiously down her back. "What is it, daughter?" "Knives," Emma answered. "Paintings, the queen in paintings. Old books." "Daughter, what are you talking about?" What knives?" Leslie, whose lips were already trembling, grabbed Emma by the shoulders and looked into her eyes, trying to figure out if the little girl was just fantasizing. "The grass is dry. The cauldron, like Baba Yaga's." "Mom, I'm not lying. I'm honestly honest." "And then what happened? Was Grandpa Harry there?" "Yeah," the little girl nodded. "He saw me, took me out of there and told me not to tell anyone about it. And that was it. And then we went to eat pies." Emma smiling and chattering her legs like nothing had happened. "Wow, that's all Carlo could say. Let's check it out." With these words, the guy rushed to the chest of drawers. "It's heavy. Steve, help." The men pushed on and the dresser went sideways with a nasty rattle of legs on the floor. And there was a door behind it. A small child could pass through, but an adult would have to duck. There was a lock on the door. "The key must be in his thing somewhere," Steve said. "We'll have to find it." "Why? We can just do that," Harvey said cheerfully, as if he had been waiting for this dark adventure, and in a couple of minutes Carlo came back with a tool for fixing things, which John kept in a drawer in the hallway and ripped the lock off. "Need a flashlight," he added, lingering. "There's one on the phone," Steve said. "Maybe we shouldn't," Leslie squeaked. "Why not? That old man bequeathed everything to you, the house too, and therefore everything in it too. Even your kid's been there," Carlos said. He pushed the door in with determination. "Honey, stay here. Mommy's coming," Leslie said to her daughter, and Emma obeyed, but pouted like an older sister. The room behind the wall was quite narrow, and both walls could be touched if you spread your arms, but it was quite long, for it stretched along the whole side wall of the house. Leslie peered fearfully over the men's shoulders. Just what she needed was for Harry's grandfather to turn out to be some kind of maniac. She had heard of such cases, when a person lived, seemingly ordinary, who could be even an exemplary family man, and then suddenly discovered such a thing. It was hair-raising. So all this time she's been helping out, cooking and cleaning, to a madman? How horrible! And she often took her daughters with her. No, Leslie couldn't blame herself for that now. And when she worked part-time in the store, she also took her girls with her. Only sometimes she left the younger one in the care of the older one. And so, what's wrong if the children are with their mother all day long? It makes her feel better. Emma has more fun, and you can see that the older one is not doing silly things, for example, not playing on the phone, but at least sometimes also read a book. "Wow," exclaimed Steve, who was walking ahead of everyone. "This is it. Shit, what a John. It's a museum." What is it?" asked Leslie, who could not make out anything in the jumping from side to side selenium of the flashlight, and she saw something scary. "Wait, there is a light bulb," Carlos said, and flicked the switch. A warm yellow light flooded the secret place that John had never allowed any living soul to enter. But it made everything in the place visible, and that made Leslie feel bad. On the walls, there were pictures of portraits of some people, obviously inhabitants of bygone eras, and colorful, gloomy posters of horror movies, on which monsters with fangs, in which it was easy to recognize vampires of all colors, were attacking people or just muzzled at the audience. On the rare shelves, there were some bottles of colored glass and clay pots. And books. Old, they seemed to be scary to touch, but they were scattered on several tables and even a chair. But the most unanswered questions of all were the weapons. Ancient sabers and daggers, and a crossbow hanging from the ceiling. There were also some huge sheets of absorbent cotton scrawled with bizarre symbols. From the ceiling, besides the crossbow, there were bundles of herbs and ancient coins hanging on red threads. "What the hell is that?" "What were you, John?" Steve said with a nervous chuckle. "I guess," said Harvey, leaning sideways for something. "Our grandfather was a hunter." "A hunter?" Leslie shook her head and didn't know whether to cry or laugh hysterically. "Aha," Carlo continued, and raised his find, a sharply sharpened wooden stake, ire for all to see. "A vampire hunter," he said, and kicked the scattering of stakes left on the floor. They didn't stay in that strange room for long, but they ran out, without speaking, but quickly and together, and without words. The atmosphere was very heavy. Naturally, any further routine cleaning and dismantling of things in the house of the deceased was out of the question. "Mom, I'm mad at you," Emma pouted. "Why didn't you take me with you? I'll buy you a chocolate bar. And a doll with braids, the one that Princess Frog, do you want?" Suddenly, Leslie addressed her daughter affectionately. "You only about what you saw here, my dear, about what we went behind the door. Don't tell anyone, okay? Let it be our secret?" "Okay, after thinking about it," the girl replied, "and a big box of marmalade too." "Okay," Leslie patted the baby on the head. In the evening of the same day, they gathered for a council at Leslie's house. "So, we need to decide what to do about all this," she said. There was a kettle on the table and fried meat pies in a dish. "Well, the man had a quirk," Steve said. "John was a good man, a worldly man. He didn't know harm to anyone, only good." "That's right," Leslie sighed. She turned her head and looked at the door in the next room, where she had just put her daughters to bed. What was he going to do about it now? Why did he need all this? What the hell was he collecting? "It's like a crazy collection." "That's what I'm thinking," Steve suggested thoughtfully, "that it would be necessary to involve some specialists, maybe the museum staff. They can tell us what he's worth." "Look at me like that, Leslie. We have to deal with this, don't we? Or do you just want to leave it alone?" "What? It's a thought." In his usual joking manner, Harvey said, "Now you know, it's fashionable to celebrate this holiday, Halloween. City people can come, and you will let them into this room of horrors for money for a tour. Oh, come on, you're talking night terrors. The landlady waved him away. I'm thinking, John's interest was unhealthy. Who believes in vampires these days? But he couldn't have been. That? She lowered her voice, as if someone might overhear them and inadvertently witness her insulting the dead man with her suspicions. He couldn't be a maniac, could he? When would he have time? Steve took a pie. He was always working or sitting around the house. No, sometimes he went to town, but my wife's favorite news is crime news, and she watches TV loudly, so that willy-nilly you listen. In general, I have not heard that someone with a stake in the heart found. Oh, my head hurts already. Leslie poured herself a hot cup of tea, but she didn't touch the drink and sat there glumly. If we'd known earlier, maybe we could have helped Pedia. What? Harvey asked snidely. Did you advise me to buy some garlic for planting? There, you found time for jokes. Steve reproached him. A sense of humor can be a life-staker in dangerous situations. Harvey winked. Personally, I'll have something to tell you about. Not right now, of course, but one day I'll be able to tell you how I went into the lair of a psychopathic neighbor and came back alive. And you know, I think, wait a minute. Harvey jumped up from the table and ran into the corridor where he came to Leslie's house, by the way, put on the floor some bag. Leslie thought that, probably from work, just came to her. But Harvey worked now as a programmer and set up the internet in the village. Here, the guy put down on the table two things: a big and thick notebook and a padded cover, and a small painting that would fit in the palm of your hand. You took something out of there? Leslie was shocked. Why? It's not a pyramid, so I'll be damned for looting it. Harvey grinned. At least I hope so. While you were rustling around in the hallway, You've said you dropped your house keys there, Steve said reproachfully, interrupting him. Well, you'd have started grumbling. I saw the looks on your faces when you came out of there. And I noticed that there was a notebook in the corner, and I thought it might be something important. Anyway, I looked in and it was a diary. John kept it, and it seemed to explain everything. Well, almost everything. Harvey opened the notebook. Well, read it. Steve hurried him up. And the boy began to read aloud. It turned out that John was not as simple as he seemed. He had a higher education and was a PhD candidate. His specialty was the culture of Eastern Europe of the 14th and 15th centuries. John mentioned that his research might have been more complete if his friend, also a scholar, had taken him seriously, but the latter had only laughed at him. Some of the pages in the diary were missing, and one could only wonder why this happened. That's why it seemed sometimes that there were solid gaps between the parts of John's narrative, and yet the essence was clear. As clear as the gist of something that looks like madness can be. It turned out that John had gone to study to be a historian, a cultural historian, not for nothing, but under the influence of his own grandfather, who was also a scientist. The grandfather said that they were obliged to understand why there was a curse over their family and how to lift it. The essence of this curse was that all the men in the family had unhappy marriages, and if it was only about divorces, wives went mad. They had accidents right on the wedding anniversary. Some left their husbands with babies in their arms. Others pushed their spouses to gambling and other vices, and disappeared somewhere in the horizon with lovers. John's grandfather believed that everything came from the fact that at the end of the 18th century, one of their ancestors had enriched himself in an evil, criminal way, and thus made powerful enemies who cursed him. And it wasn't just ordinary people or even wizards. It was vampires. That's why John's grandfather taught him from a young age that there was a secret science to recognize a vampire. You know, if my grandfather had locked me in a dugout in the woods when I was a kid, when I was soiling the mattress, so afraid of the dark. Steve interrupted his reading. I'd have grown up crazy too. What's the matter? Well, you don't have luck with women. It happens. Maybe there were happy marriages, but just this crazy grandfather did not want to mention them, so as not to spoil his statistics. Because, no, well, it's nonsense. I agree, nodded Harvey. In general, I thought, well, if you look at books and movies, that vampires, they attack to feed. And here, it turns out, not just simple vampires, but also in addition and blacksmiths. That's a lot of imagination. And what a callous heart you'd have to have, Harvey grinned. To take your own grandson into the woods and scare him with your stories. No wonder John's attic was leaking in places. I agree. Leslie sipped her iced tea. She wrinkled her nose and turned on the kettle for boiling water. I do not understand. And how could he get a higher education, work somewhere there, even in Europe on business trips? It turns out that he left his family, freed himself from its influence, and then it's as if his mind burst from all that he had experienced, from all that was hammered into his head. So, he was a normal person, and then he went completely insane. It happens, Steve said. It's rare, but it happens. Maybe they're hereditary, who knows? That's awful. Leslie shuddered. There was a man who lived, a good man was. Well, that only we know. Not a word, by the way, okay. She wagged her finger. John did a lot of good for the Ovrachki, and he doesn't deserve to be treated like a buffoon when he's dead. Not a word, said Harvey. Me neither. Steve confirmed it. What does it say next? Wait, let me. Your voice is getting a little hoarse. So, here we go. John wrote that at a certain point his career in Europe did not go well, or to be more precise, his colleagues, seeing his strong interest in the legends of vampires, began to make fun of him. And when he became so interested in this topic that he ceased to be able to keep up with everything else, he was kicked out with shame and ridicule. But he wasn't upset, because he knew that he had already done enough to get on the trail of those creatures that had once ruined the life of his kind. His family's life was ruined. Harvey mocked the diary entry. That's interesting. So his ancestors were thieves, vampires were sorcerers, and he was cursed for the deed. But not a word about that. No way. John's pretending his family are innocent victims. That's a neat trick. Wait, we'll have time to have our say. Steve raised his finger. It's even more interesting. And literally in 2 lines, John mentioned that while still a student, he met the love of his life, the beautiful Sophia. But she chose someone else over him, which, naturally, was blamed on the curse. Dryly and also briefly, John mentioned that the business in the early 90s was easier for him than he had expected, and that in principle, he already realized that his life's work would never be finished, because his search was cut short, ended in nothing. Because that rich family, in which part of the people were unclean, they died at the end of the 19th century, and their children left no descendants. Anyway, it looked like it was all over. But despite that, in the late 90s, John found people who were connoisseurs of antiques and antiquities and bought from them things that had been used in the last century and earlier by real vampire hunters. He thought that just in case, he should be ready to destroy the creatures of the night. Such existed? Ag Leslie. Who were they, the crazies, hunting? I suppose they were just swindling money out of honest citizens, said Harvey, and who would demand proof from them? They lied that the vampire turned to ashes after the stake. That's all. And the ashes were blown away by the breeze. Or maybe they got a homeless guy. So, I won't touch those. Daggers and sabers with my bare hand. Leslie said with feeling. That's horrible. You don't know what's next, said Steve grimly, looking at the very end of the diary. And he did. It turned out that John had tested all the neighbors in the village to see if they were vampires by any chance. He'd written earlier in his diary that vampires shouldn't walk in the sun. But then he'd added that, since all living things evolve in nature, vampires, though not living things, could theoretically evolve, too, which meant he couldn't relax. So he looked around at the villagers. But he never suspected anyone in the end. It turned out that John didn't find any specific signs of vampires, such as moles in the corner of the eyes or fingers fused to the webbing. However, he added that in addition to such flaws, a true vampire should not cast shadows at sunset. In general, the neighbors were beyond suspicion. Good, Harvey grinned. Or, imagine waking up to John with a crossbow or a silver blade. That's hilarious. Right, hilarious to death. Steve kicked the guy's foot under the table, saying, "This is no time for jokes, and your jokes, brother, are so bad." What about the painting? Leslie asked. Judging by the artist's signature, it was painted at the very end of the 19th century. Harvey turned it. It was a portrait. It showed a lovely young girl with hair as black as a raven's wing. She was dressed and combed in a fashion stylized in antiquity, which made her seem fragile and ephemeral. Judging from the entries in his journal, Steve sighed. This was the same maiden from the vampire family. She died of measles when she was 18. That's what they'd written back then. But John believed it was one of the last of the vampires in the clan, and she was just running away so the hunters wouldn't catch up. Beautiful, Steve added. Why don't they have girls like that anymore? There are girls like that now, Leslie said pityingly. It's just that you're in trouble. What? Is your girl very violent? Yeah, Steve used to be embarrassed to talk about his marital problems, man. But then the cup of patience and the willingness to bear it all in silence overflowed. Steve wasn't originally a villager. He was born in a big city, and as he thought in his youth, in the most beautiful of Mussolini. Mother did not remember, did not know, died at his birth. So the upbringing of little Olechka entirely fell on the shoulders of the remaining two relatives of his father and grandmother on his side. And as long as Steve remembered his childhood, his grandmother embodied for him affection, care, warmth, understanding, kindness, and his father's strictness, coldness, indifference, offenses, but he still loved him. And as soon as he began to realize himself, he began to feel that he must be so defective, not good, if his father did not love him. When Steve was 12 years old, his grandmother died of a stroke, and he and his father were left alone. At first, Steve was glad that her father did not drink. He thought that the absence of this vice gives any guarantees that they will live normally. But it turned out that there are other vices besides alcohol, and Steve's father turned out to be an irrepressible gambler. By the time Steve turned 18, his father had managed to lose everything that could be taken out of the apartment, and then the apartment itself. It turned out he'd somehow managed to pawn off his large share of the apartment for sports betting. And one day serious and gloomy people showed up in the apartment and put Steve before the fact that he had to sell them his tiny share for pennies because they would not let him live here. Steve raised his hand to his father for the first time in his life and just punched him in the face. "Did you wait, you old fool?" he shouted at his parent, looking straight into his eyes. "How many times have I tried to help you? You don't have a son anymore." Steve was bitter and hurt that his father had become like this, and taking advantage of his majority, the guy hurried to leave home. There was a place to live. He entered a neighboring city in the vocational school, in the auto mechanic, and managed to beat out a place in the dormitory. In general, a new life began. Steve didn't pick up the phone when his father called, and then the hospital called. His father, like his grandmother, had suffered a stroke, and just as quickly this disease took Steve's father to the other world. Having received an education by this time, Steve returned to his hometown to settle the real estate business. He went to consult with lawyers. They spread their hands and honestly said that all attempts to nullify the deal, once made by his father, doomed to failure in advance. Then Steve agreed to sell his share of the apartment. The money raised in the city for housing, even the worst room would not be enough, and realizing that the rented housing, this money just in nowhere will go nowhere in someone else's pocket, Steve decided that he needs to move to the village. Only here he could buy at least some real estate. Steve bought the house from a couple of old dandelion men who were moving to the city with their grown-up children. That house was scary to look at, but Steve, as it happened, could not only work with his hands, but also loved it, so that slowly what seemed to be a barn became a very decent dwelling. In the village itself, with work was not abundant, but in the district center for a smart car mechanic was a lot of work, and Steve realized here it is, his chance to arrange a normal with the mind of his life. That's when he met Harvey, who was just a kid at the time. And somehow it so happened that they became friends, although the people around, by the way, this friendship did not understand especially. Harvey liked to ask about city life, then he was already a dreamer without coasts, and Steve was charged by him optimism easy, despite all the circumstances, a view of life. By the will of fate, by his 23 years of age, Steve had virtually no experience of relationships with the opposite sex. It just so happened in the technical school about studying thought, in the village first time about work and repairing the house. Looking back later, Steve believed that it was his inexperience played a cruel joke on him. He believed that it was because of this that he had given in so violently to his feelings when he met Julia. She was from a neighboring village where she had returned from the city, where she had studied to become a seamstress. They met in the district center, just came to eat at a fast food, and sat at the same table because there were almost no free seats. They talked. Steve was impressed by Lucy's story, and it turned out that her family was not easy either. Mom, for example, spent half her life in a madhouse, could not accept the departure of her first and only lover to another woman. But not from that favorite man's daughter was born, and from some random man. Julia, in fact, was raised by her maternal grandparents, and they never hid from her what a problem her mother was. Lucy confessed that she was always afraid of going crazy and repeating her mother's fate. Steve saw in Lucy a kindred spirit, a person with a similar fate, who also suffered from the imperfections of her family. And Lucy was also so quick-witted, talkative. She was so bright. She was capable of laughing to tears at the simplest of jokes and crying after watching a sad movie. She was not like, as it seemed to Steve, On modern girls, she did not care that he is not rich. She believed that the main thing is true love, and there is sure to settle everything and will be a family happiness. Marriage was concluded hastily, as if the promised happiness someone threatened to take away from them. And they lived, except that Steve, much later looking back, realized that he was blind. Didn't notice the obvious beacons indicating that his Lucy was no ordinary person. More than once he'd been ready to tear his hair out, remembering how her grandparents had taken him aside and politely told him he was a nice guy, but their Lucy was no match. Then Steve decided that they didn't think he was good enough for their granddaughter. Too late he realized how wrong he was. They just wanted to warn him, to save him. Soon after the wedding, Steve, spending whole days together with Lucy, began to notice how abruptly, violently her moods changed. They could quarrel over nothing. He sometimes could not get an answer from his wife to a simple question, and what was his fault once again? Steve tried to adapt to Lucy's mood swings. He was shocked when she accused him of flirting with a postmistress who was old enough to be his grandmother. Steve used to find funny stories, anecdotes, and tales about pathologically jealous husbands. But now he himself had become a hostage of his spouse. That story with the postmistress, by the way, did not end simply so Lucy hit Steve on the street. Then she cried and apologized, saying she didn't know what had come over her. Looking back again and again, Steve realized he should have divorced then. To understand who was hiding under the mask of a cute, bright in its emotionality girl, but then Lucy reported that she was pregnant. Now divorce was out of the question. Steve wrote off all her increasing whims, nagging and scandals on the fact that pregnant women, they say, hormonal changes. Her strange behavior after the appearance of Barry, he wrote off to postpartum depression. Steve learned to anticipate the change of Julie's moods, learned to talk to her carefully, not to make her angry, not to piss her off, not to drive her crazy, and not to ask for scandals. He realized that all this is abnormal somehow, but did not know what to do with it all. Steve was sometimes horrified at how he had gotten used to it, how, as it turned out, he had lost his pride and desire for a normal life during the time he had spent as Lucy's husband. It was, by the way, especially strange that in public Lucy rarely broke down in general, was silent and timid, talking to him politely. However, Steve himself, having studied her carefully over the years, could already guess when, for example, behind her seemingly ordinary words, there is a harsh, cruel implication, which others simply do not notice. Steve feared that his son would eventually acquire the same oddities as his mother, except that Barry grew up quite different from her little man. He was kind, cheerful, sincere, easy to make friends, and when Barry began to grow up, it became clear that with his father he finds a much better common language than with his mother, whom the boy generally shunned. Steve, after the birth of his son, resigned himself to the fact that his personal life did not succeed. But then, when his wife launched at him with a pot of freshly boiled potatoes, Steve suddenly stopped shy and came to Leslie for ointment for burns, took and cried. He said that he tolerated the marriage only for the sake of his son, but as the boy grows up, that's it, he will divorce. Leslie was a little shocked by this confession, but then said that yes, she felt that there was something wrong in Steve's family. She supported him that divorce was the only option. Leslie knew firsthand. True, she hadn't been divorced herself, but she had endured 2 painful separations in her life with Selena and Emma's fathers. The first man said that he loved, that he wanted a family, but changed his mind as soon as he learned of Leslie's pregnancy and did ban or ran away somewhere else, before saying that the alimony to file useless because to spike her will work in the gray. Leslie decided that from the traitor will not take a penny. She held on for a long time, but then decided that the world, it is a complicated thing and you can, perhaps, the fate to get a second chance at female happiness. That man, with whom she got together, was as if even more serious than the first. But he also betrayed the matter was that he learned that there would be a girl, began to insist on termination, saying that he needed a son, hair, jeans, and not a useless girl. After that, Leslie firmly decided no more men. Let it be better to be a peaceful female kingdom and personal life. You can, and without them to find happiness. The main thing that the daughters were healthy and happy, fed and satisfied with everything. "You're sorry," said Leslie, when Steve once again came to talk to the neighbor and complain about his wife. "But Lucy, well, maybe it's not just her temper. You said her mom was crazy." "Maybe. Don't take offense," she added hastily, "but maybe. Should she see a psychologist?" I've thought about that. Steak side? I don't know. I suggested counseling. There's couples therapy for troubled couples now, but it's not gonna work. When I talked to her, she thought I wanted to put her in a mental institution. Can you believe it? Leslie shook her head at you. You're carrying a family all by yourself. It was like that after the birth of her son. Lucy quit her job as a seamstress. First, because it was naturally maternity leave. And then, she began to say that machines gave her a headache, and in general, she was satisfied with the role of a housewife. Steve, who saw how her mood could deteriorate if she stayed long among people, agreed that he just painfully wanted at least a more or less quiet life. Besides, he now worked in a large auto repair shop in the district center, and his income was enough for everything and everyone. And it so happened that Harvey knew about his problems in the family, because he was Steve's best friend, and although he was a joker, a talker, but never gave away other people's secrets. And now, the whole little company was united by one dark and strange secret, and for some reason, it seemed that its consequences could be very serious. "What are your plans for the land, Leslie?" Steve asked. "I have no idea," Leslie shrugged and sighed. "It's fall. If it were summer or spring, I'd have more to worry about. Well, the harvest they're to gather, and so, it turns out, nothing if the land without it. Literate agricultural care to build until spring." "Oh, it's not about that now. We need to think about what we should do with our finds. So what shall we do? It seems to me it would be better to, I don't know, to clean up all these John's riches quietly and pretend they never happened. It'd be better for everybody." Harvey had a thought common to the whole little company. However, they decided not to talk about anything else. The time was late, and it seemed to everyone that there was no strength to think about anything. The next day, Leslie did not even appear in the neighbor's house. She was busy with her own affairs. Then she began to clean up slowly and move some of her things to her place. Harvey insisted that the things from that room should also be sorted out, because all sorts of creepy things, like a saber with a conspiracy on the blade or aspen stakes, it's one thing, but old paintings and books of obvious antique origin, it's quite another. All these things were carefully, and most importantly, quietly, so as not to excite anyone's curiosity, also transferred to Leslie's house. The paintings were covered with a cloth, so as not to accidentally damage them. And then there was a fire, and John's house burned down. Just one night, Leslie woke up from a knock on the window and shouting neighbors jumped out, and there, burning so that to look terrible. The firefighters turned out to be guys quick, but only the elements have tried, and not only the elements. "It's arson," one of the firemen said confidently. "That's what it looks like." "What?" Leslie couldn't believe it. "Who would have thought of that? I mean, why would you do something like that?" "Who knows?" the fireman shrugged, taking off his helmet and eagerly emptying his water bottle. "Who knows? You say this house of your dead grandfather was. Well, there was once such a case, though. There was a mansion extinguished. In general, a businessman divorced his wife, and under the marriage contract, she, as they say, barefoot remained. Apparently, she took offense at that and set fire to the house. That's how it happens. We have good people." Leslie felt offended for the people of her native village. She realized that she couldn't vouch for everyone here, but such an act seemed a wildness, not at all suitable for the peaceful way of life of Ovrajki. In the morning, of course, everyone went to see what was left. There wasn't much left, not much at all. Leslie could only rejoice that she had managed to drag a lot of things into the house. And then while she was walking there, coughing from the bitter dust rising up with every step, then suddenly, like lightning, she realized who could have done it. "Maria, come out, you wretch." Leslie, puffed up with righteous anger, knocked on the shriveled door of the outermost house in the village. "Why are you making so much noise?" The owner of the house looked out, asleep and swollen from drinking. "What do you want? You'll wake everyone up. Normal people are already up and working." Leslie gritted her teeth and without any preamble poked Maria in the chest with her index finger. "Tell me why you burned down John's house, huh? You were jealous that he bequeathed everything to normal people and not to you, a tornado, right?" "What are you talking about?" Maria's eyes widened. "I didn't set fire to anything." "Oh, you lied." Leslie squinted unkindly. "Why would anyone else? You're the only one capable of such a thing. You lost your human form a long time ago. What are you?" Maria looked very bad, but so looked now that Leslie suddenly thought that maybe, and she is not to blame for the arson. After all, before, no matter how drunk she was, and did not do nasty things to the villagers, I think. Maybe your men set the fire. Leslie made a new accusation, but not so confidently. What men? I'm living with one now. What do you take me for? You think if I don't work now, if I drink, I'm a criminal? What do you know about me? Do you have a conscience? Leslie pressed her lips together. Even if she was wrong, she wasn't going to apologize. Not to someone like that lost soul. Okay, maybe it's not you, she said and turned around and walked away from Maria's house. 2 weeks passed and the fire began to be forgotten. Life went on in Barrow. Everyone had their own worries. But then the villagers were in a flash excited by a new event. It was that a man from the town had come to the village. He came in an expensive black Jeep with tinted windows, and on the second car came some, apparently, specialists because they had in their hands some tools and walked on the field, which was usually sown with beets and belonged to John. And then, leaving the experts aside, this man went straight to Leslie's house. Mom's not home, said Selena looking out the door. She's at the store, and I'm home with my sister. She's sick. She seems to have the flu. A man in a business suit and shiny shoes that looked like they were made of crocodile skin thanked her for the answer, wished her well, and came straight to the store. He came at an unfortunate moment. Leslie was just arguing with Grandma Sarah. In general, Sarah was a quiet old woman, but sometimes and usually right after receiving her pension, apparently out of frustration, because of the fact that this very pension in her hands very quickly ran out, she began to look for someone in the village to pick on, and her choice usually fell on the post office or the store. There was still, of course, a paramedic, but with him Sarah maintained the best relations that he treated well. And the others? Grandma Yulia liked to say about them that they were just service personnel, tools of capitalism, so let them blame themselves if they dared not respect her rights. This time Sarah's grandmother's right was violated by the fact that they sold her as if it were stale smoked fish. In fact, Leslie was ready to swear by her own health that the fish was the freshest. But Sarah wouldn't listen. Give me the complaint book, and I want my money back. Where to? Give me back the fish, I pay for it. The old woman raised her voice to such an extent that the people who were stuck in line after her appearance even cringed. If the goods are of poor quality, they should be returned to the store, said the saleswoman. Sarah snorted and started tapping her palm on the counter. Leslie seriously thought about the fact that under the strong blows of a dry, gnarled foot glass can and crack. I want my money back, and more, condensed milk as compensation for moral damage. 2. No, give me 4 cans. Sarah, maybe that's enough? A man looked out from the queue. You should be ashamed of your neighbors. The fish here is fine. We got it yesterday. Excuse me, are you Leslie? A new face appeared in the store, attracted attention because the man was tall, a head taller than everyone here. I'm tired of being pushed around by Grandma Sarah. Leslie, what do you want? Are you from the insurance company? No, the man answered. I need to talk to you. I'm working. What time do you get off? What do you want? Come on, hurry up. I'm so fed up with everything. Leslie spluttered, snatching the bag with caramel pads from Sarah's hands, which she, quietly muttering something under her nose, managed to pull. You see, I've come from Washington and what? Leslie was on the verge a little more and was ready to swear everyone out of the store. And then it would be nice to crawl under the shelves with buns, like a mouse and sob from the heart. Maybe then stavate it and a second breath will open. You see, I don't have much time and I need to speak to John Harris. What's this about? It's a private conversation. Well, get out of the store, and then come back sometime. The man hesitated. Leslie felt sorry for him. He looked so confused. Take it, please, he said, holding out his business card to her. Call me, please, when you're free. He left and Leslie breathed a sigh of relief at last. No distractions. She finally fought off Grandma Sarah, who bought condensed milk, tea, and buckwheat, grumbled about the fish, and left. After her 8-pin shift was over, Leslie pulled a business card and a phone out of her pocket and dialed the number. In general, she had no energy at all for any kind of conversation, but the stranger's appearance was unsettling. And those words of his about her being in Harris, it seemed to her that he, maybe someone like a lawyer. Although, where is it that a notary sends someone to talk to heirs in inheritance cases? Alexander, you stopped by today. Yes, Let's figure out how to meet are you still here? A minute later, Leslie saw a car parked nearby, and out of it came this guy. He took the phone away from his ear and walked over to her. You guys have been waiting in a car all day? Actually, it's been a couple hours. I thought it would be easier for me to wait until your store's business hours were over. I need to talk to you right away. What's on fire? I beg your pardon? Never mind. What's your hurry? Leslie nervously fixed a strand of hair that had gotten out of the tight bun at the back of her head. In general, initially she was almost peaceful, but as soon as this guy with a look that would make him a soap opera announced the purpose of his arrival, Leslie flared with indignation and threw under his nose a folded figure made of fingers. This is my land, not mine. Wait, Alexander darted after the wide-stepping woman. I just wanted to. Leslie snorted angrily. She knew what he wanted. It turned out that he had come to negotiate the purchase of John's land, and he said it in a derogatory way. You don't know anything about farming anyway, so let's negotiate. I'm offering a good price. Leslie was in principle not evil and very even patient person. But not in this case. You offer such a thing because you are a woman or a countrywoman. Excuse me? Blurted out Alexander, who almost crashed into her so abruptly she stopped, turning abruptly to him. Well, you're saying I can't manage. She pointed a finger at his chest, somewhere in the center of his silk tie. Is it because you're a city girl and I'm a country girl, or because you think women are dumber than you are? I didn't mean to say anything like that, but you did. Listen. Alexander must have been zealously guarding his personal space, because he took Leslie's hand gently by the wrist and pulled it away from him. It was strange, but the skin-to-skin contact gave her goosebumps for some reason. The thing is, John didn't just own a field of vegetables, greenhouses and all. He owned another piece of land. It's all wooded now. It's a lot of land. And problematic. It needs to be cleared. Yes, I've never heard of such a thing, Leslie said thoughtfully, but with a hint of doubt. Perhaps because you just helped John, but did not do business with him, found something to aptly wound Leslie's city type with the appearance. Now she knew exactly who he could play in the show, cunning, heartless lawyer working for the mafia. Maybe, Leslie pursed her lips, but that doesn't mean I'm going to sell it all for nothing. I haven't named the price yet. You've definitely underestimated it. Can I ask you why you have that opinion of me? Why you think I'm undervaluing? I don't know, Leslie answered honestly. I just don't like you. I don't like you very much. That's it. I'm going home. And don't follow me, or else. We could just. No. She turned on him with a triumphant look. We can and we won't. Never. Leave me alone, already, please. The sky was filled with siso-gray clouds. A storm was approaching. Leslie walked towards the house, and although she looked back, she was sure that the city type got into the car and drove away. She had a feeling that she was being followed. It seemed to her that someone's heavy, unkind gaze was fixed on her back. Nervously shrugging her shoulders, Leslie entered her house. Thinking that it was, of course, she had imagined it after her meeting with Alexander. She didn't know that the unkind gaze had actually followed her from afar, and then glared at her door for several minutes. She didn't know that the threat she felt wasn't just a dream. It was as real as the rumble of thunder in the distance, and the threat had been born that night, when she had risked bringing the paintings that the old man knew were of real vampires from John's secret room into her house. Nothing happened in the village for about a week. That is, happened of course, but in fact, these events belonged to ordinary, everyday life and did not shock anyone. Leslie went into town to see a notary. The notary turned out to be not only a professional, but also a helpful man. When Leslie shared with him her confusion about how to manage the farm, he advised her to contact some farmers in the neighborhood to help them properly take care of the land and plantings. It's not a simple matter, said the notary. If you live in the countryside, you know how much care the land needs. My wife and I have a cottage. We missed a couple of months this year in the spring was no time, then came back, and therein pests have already feasted, and also fertilizers. It turns out, these nitrogen fertilizers should have been laid in due time, and missed, and well, he waved his hand. In general, it is not an easy business farming. And if you think, as you say, still sell or maybe rent, then come, I will help, advise on all matters. Leslie left the city satisfied with the fact that the notary turned out to be a solid, intelligent, and soulful to a certain extent man. Daughter, why are you on the phone again? Take some books to read, or it will be again in literature twos, my grief. Grumbled at Selena Leslie while molding another pie. The previous batch is already in full blush on the pan. Mom, why do I even need to study? Leslie responded her daughter. We are rich. You're so smart. Leslie sighed. Rich, but not like that, as we sell everything. So according to you, what? I'll lose everything, Skip. No, my dear, you should put it away. You should live wisely, frugally. And then, do you think the rich can be fools? But now I don't have to go to university. I can start a business right away. Startup. Leslie rolled her eyes. She sometimes did not understand how she could have two such different daughters. One is smart, sweet, and the second rebels in his 12 years, so that even how? What kind of business is there to talk about at that age? She's just a little girl. No, you'll study. You'll go to university when the time comes. Mom, I'm going to be a blogger soon. A what? A blogger. I'm gonna have millions of followers. Right now, because you're sitting on the bed eating cookies again, we're gonna have millions of cockroaches. Now get out of here. Leslie, sighing again, continued molding and frying pies. She was already regretting being so harsh with Alexander. Not that she was going to sell the land, but it was worth admitting she really didn't have much idea what to do with it all next. I mean, theoretically, one could eventually figure it out and take up farming too. But Leslie remembered the conversation at the notary's office. He had mentioned how much land John owned. And it turned out that indeed, there was not only a field of vegetables, greenhouses and so on, but also more pieces of territory. Here they, as it seemed to Leslie, could be sold. True, it's not clear what this guy was going to do there. However, the main thing is to sell. And with the proceeds of the money could do a lot of things. First of all, we could build a new house. 2 stories, with a glassed-in veranda and a big greenhouse. Maybe even a greenhouse. Leslie had always dreamed of growing exotic flowers. She got so excited, she almost burned the pies. Having finished cooking, Leslie called her daughters to eat and drink tea. She decided that she would call Alexander tomorrow. Barry loved his daddy very much, and if daddy told him to behave himself and not to go to dangerous places at night, then of course he would obey him. Because daddy was smart and good, and such advice would have sounded sensible. But it was mommy who told him to stay home, to study, not to walk, not to play, and so Barry just couldn't stand home on a night like this, because he disliked his mother exactly as much as he adored his father. No, there was a time in his life when his mommy seemed the best, but then, when she began to behave so strangely and swear at daddy, when she began to scold his own son for nothing, Barry suddenly realized that she didn't need him. He understood, and in books he had read that one should be able to forgive, to understand that people can make mistakes, but there was no patience. And since so far, Barry realized he was too young to live the way he wanted, he could at least do the little things against his mother's word. That's why he agreed to help his daughter Leslie. In fact, his mom was adamantly opposed to him hanging out with Selena. She said that she was like her mother. She said that Leslie had her eye on her father and she wouldn't tolerate it. Hearing this for the first time, Barry thought that he would give everything to Selena if it could be made so that his mother suddenly became Aunt Leslie and not the woman who was his own parent. And so, at an hour deep past midnight, Barry now stood with Sveta at the ruins of John's house. They had climbed up to the second floor. It was almost unscathed by the fire. Only darkened, blackened, it was gloomy. But if one were to use one's imagination, one could imagine that they were in an ancient, ruined castle haunted by ghosts. Selena had talked her little friend into this obviously crazy idea after overhearing a curious conversation between her mother and the neighbors who visited her. Selena used to hate it when her mom made her go to John's house. Because the old man was strange, he smelled bad. But then that night, Selena couldn't sleep, and she went to the door and heard such a thing. She was shocked the negro turned out to be crazy. He had a bunch of dark stuff. Naturally, as soon as she could, Selena went to see what her mom had brought. She was a little disappointed because there were no cursed dolls or gold, but there was a painting of a supposed vampire. Selena gave the portrait a tongue lashing, and it wasn't scary at all, just some black-haired girl. The girl was offended that her mother considers her a little girl and does not tell about anything. And then she visited the idea of how this mystical story can be promoted on the network. In general, Selena had a few subscribers, only 100, but she had no doubt that if she released such a video, it would collect 1 million. But to act alone, It was not too comfortable. She was also afraid. That's why Selena called her son Steve to come along. "My dear followers, I'm glad to welcome you on my page." Saying this, Selena held a smartphone on her outstretched hand in front of her. "Today you and I will try to summon a vampire. Yes, we're going to summon a ghoul. My friend Barry and I have snuck into a forbidden and cursed house. We're about to begin. In the meantime, please subscribe and like me." With a concentrated sniffle, the girl set her smartphone on a tripod. "Come on, Barry," Selena said cheerfully, and sending a smile to her audience, started to help him. Chalk to draw a circle and symbols. Candle to bait the monster with live fire. Salt to ward it off when it arrives. Sticking out her tongue with eagerness, Celine drew a circle that was uneven. Then the candle didn't want to light. But finally, everything was done. Maybe we shouldn't. I've seen it in American documentary movies. Barry wanted to ask what exactly she saw as hunters running away from the evil, or an example of how to deceive their subscribers, but did not say a word because he really heard something. They were not alone in the house. The boy distinctly heard footsteps below them on the first floor. Selena, there's someone here." "Good," she nodded. "I see natural fear. But first." The girl was about to turn on the camera. She stepped back a couple steps, then mussed her hair with her fingers and started making faces, apparently choosing the best ones for this performance. And then suddenly the floor under her feet crunched. The old boards, sharpened by the fire, began to sag and Selena fell down. It would have been a disaster, but the girl had fallen only to her waist, and she had spread her arms and clung to the floor. Barry picked up on his friend's startled cry and rushed to her. I've got her," he gibbered, grabbing her by the shoulders and the collar of her jacket. And suddenly Selena froze, her eyes rounded, her face, though it was hard to see anything in the pitch darkness, turned white. "Someone is dragging me from below," she whispered. "Someone's got me by the legs." And as if to confirm it, a voice came from the first floor. "Don't move. Everything can collapse. Let go. I'll catch you." But these words, very roughly, only Barry could make out. But Selena? Apparently the girl was in a panic, because he suddenly said, "Vampire! A vampire attacked me!" And then she squealed so loudly that Barry's ears popped. And then? Apparently the boards where she'd fallen through were flimsy, because suddenly Selena was all the way down, disappeared with a shriek down below. Barry didn't realize how he hadn't lost consciousness himself. He was acting as if on automatic. He moved along the wall. He had heard somewhere that this was the safest way. Carefully, one small step at a time, he reached the doorway. He heard something happening downstairs, a rustling, and then a new squeal, a scream. The boy couldn't stand it. Not thinking that anything else could collapse in this house, he rushed through the door and down the stairs. For a moment he looked up. The hole where Selena had fallen from was located, so that someone standing at the top of the stairs could reach Selena and pulled her down. But who was it? The boy, lighting his way with his smartphone, picked it up off the floor and climbed down the stairs. Selena was sitting at the bottom, teeth chattering, herself trembling, eyes round and staring at one point. "Are you all right?" Having asked the question, Barry was immediately embarrassed. What a stupid thing to say. A person can't be all right after something like that. "Someone saved you." He spoke again. "Didn't let you fall. Who was it? And why did he leave?" Celine looked up and then said only 3 words. "The vampire from the portrait." Naturally, the guys didn't have any thoughts of continuing to shoot anything. Now that it was over, they just silently left the house and walked home. To be more precise, they thought they were going home. But as soon as they stepped over the threshold, they were blinded by the light of the headlights and deafened by the screams. It turned out that Selena's mom and Barry's dad had rushed to the house. The adults rushed over to the kids. They began to examine them, shaking them, asking them what they were doing. How dared they go out in the middle of the night in such a place? And then it turned out that the relatives were here not because they simply discovered the disappearance of offspring and went to look for it, was that both of them received a call from an unknown number. The voice sounded strangely distorted, but it seemed to belong to a woman, and he said that the children were at John's house. "I'll get you." Leslie seemed to take a swing at her daughter, but the next moment she just hugged her child tightly and burst into tears. Selena picked up on the roar and started swearing to her mother that she would never do that again on Selena. "Well, boy, you're screwed," said Steve to his son. "What were you doing in there, huh?" Selena wanted to make a video for her subscribers. We were on the second floor and we wanted to summon a vampire. What? What second floor, son? It was on fire. You could have fallen. You can't even go in the house. Selena did fall, Barry sniffed. He didn't think he'd incur the wrath of his parents by telling the truth. The floor had broken. Her legs fell through, but someone was downstairs and, well, he saved her, caught her and pulled her down. What? Leslie, hearing this, lost her pitying mood and began to shake her daughter so that she clenched her teeth. Oh, you! Oh, for crying out loud! What are you thinking about, Mom? You could have killed yourself. I won't let you out of my house until you're 20. You wanted to make a video. I'll show you a video. With those last words, Leslie grabbed her daughter's smartphone out of Barry's hands and just slammed it to the floor with all her might, then kicked it over. That's it. Your dose vida is over, Selena. Get ready. Already on the approach to the village, Steve and Leslie decided not to have any educational conversations in the middle of the night and in general to postpone all the worrying care until morning. Now like mice back home, let's hope Mom is sleeping soundly, said Steve. He and his son entered the house, quietly, sneaking. Come on, let's go to your room. Daddy. Steve tousled his son's hair. You know the most important thing to me is that you're alive and well. I'm not mad anymore. But this is gonna be a serious conversation. You and me, not a word to Mom. Thank you. Barry sniffed his nose and went to his room. Steve had long ago slept on the couch in the great room instead of in the marital bedroom. Now he peeked out the bedroom door and it was quiet. Sometimes Lucy snored in her sleep, but now it was as quiet as if she hadn't been home at all. Steve took off his shoes, walked to the couch, but sleep wouldn't come, not only because of what his son had done, but also because it just so coincidentally ran out of strength to live in such a terribly funny parody of marriage. But what else was there to do? The only thing to do was to endure. What hurts? Leslie asked her daughter when we got inside. Nothing. I told you, I'm not hurt. Mommy, please forgive me. I forgive you, but you will be punished, Leslie said, spinning her around and groping her, but nothing seemed to be broken. She's all grown up and she's making up such nonsense. What vampire? From the portrait. He was there, really. He was there. Yes, of course. That's enough. Go to sleep. We'll deal with this in the morning. Don't wake your sister. Selena went to the room she shared with Emma. Leslie sighed and went into the kitchen. I don't think she'll be able to sleep now. At least have some coffee to stop the headache. What an event. As if there weren't enough problems. And then there was this strange phone call. It turns out that someone sneaked into the burned house that night and accidentally caught the children there and saved the girl from falling from such a height. But who could it be? Why did he give his name? And why would someone want to get into the house? She didn't believe her daughter's chatter for a minute, but John and his madness about vampires, a fire, and now the once mysterious and obviously not with white fluffy intentions. And then Leslie remembered that her daughter had taken something from John's things for her adventure, a small portrait and something else. It turns out it was left in the house. It was possible, of course, to go in the morning to take it, but it was going to rain and Leslie was afraid that the ancient canvas could be seriously damaged by dampness. And also, what if the rats would be interested and try it for a tooth? She wasn't sure about the rats, but the impending thunderstorm was a real problem. Leslie cursed quietly. The painting must be worth a lot of money and you can't throw away your wealth like that. So after checking that her daughters were both asleep at last, she grabbed a flashlight and left the house. It wouldn't take long, Leslie decided, and John's house was still basically solid. She would quietly, carefully go in, take what she needed and return. In the night darkness, illuminated by distant lightning flashes, John's house made a truly sinister impression. The flashlight beam twitched, jumped as Leslie entered it and carefully, checking each step with the toe of her sneaker, began to climb the stairs. A thunderclap in the sky was now very close, and she shrugged. What a nasty feeling, as if someone unkind was glaring at her back. Don't be a fool. It's just nerves, Leslie told herself. The floor on the second floor looked suspicious, but she risked taking a couple of steps, especially since the painting and whatever else the silly daughter had stolen were lying right next to it. Taking the things, Leslie sighed with relief. Now home. And sleep. And in the morning. Everything would be in the morning, all later. She had already turned to the stairs when a flash of lightning illuminated the face opposite with a cold, ghostly light. Lucy? The neighbor stood on the stairs, silently looking up at Leslie. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, did you get a call too?" Leslie interpreted her appearance in her own way. "Don't worry, the house is all yours. It's okay. It's just my stupid older sister. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't even think she'd be smart enough to do that. It's okay. I can imagine how shocked you are. I almost lost my mind myself." Leslie talked and talked, and it did not immediately occur to her that Lucy looked strange for a mother disturbed by the fact that her son had run away from home. She stared unblinking, her face seeming as if chiseled from marble with hard features, her jaw tightly clenched. "I'm not giving Steve up," Lucy said in a colorless voice. "What? Who won't?" Leslie sincerely didn't understand. "Lucy, what are you talking about? And what are you here? What are you doing here?" Leslie was used to living materially. She had never been oriented on any kind of premonitions and similar psychic abilities. But right now, she was as if struck. She felt the danger. "Lucy, are you okay?" Her voice treacherously shook as she turned to her neighbor. She suddenly smiled. Leslie swallowed hard. She remembered a documentary about wildlife, in which it was said that some predators are very good at sensing the fear of their victims, and its appearance is considered a signal to attack. It seemed to Leslie that something like that was happening to Lucy, who was acting strangely, and in this case, the victim was her, Leslie. "You've wanted my Steve for a long time." Lucy's hands, which had been hanging along her body, now began to rise slowly, as if an invisible puppeteer was pulling the strings. "I'm not giving him up." "Lucy, what are you doing?" The woman blinked confusedly. "Steve and I are just friends. I'm raising my daughters alone, and I don't meet anyone." "Lucy, please, let's get out of here and talk calmly about everything. First, you lay down with the old man. He gave you the house. Now you want my husband. Too bad you weren't in the house when it was burning. I should have brought you beer and thrown you in. I should have burned the house down for nothing." Lucy muttered and looked angry. "What?" Leslie's mind was reeling from what she was hearing. She couldn't believe that Lucy had set the house on fire. "You stole my mom's boyfriend," Lucy said in a very strange voice. "You want to steal my man away from me. I won't, you bastard. I'll destroy you." Lucy screamed her last words and threw herself at Leslie. She recoiled, wanted to bounce away, but Lucy grabbed the floor of her clothes, pulled, and there Leslie's leg twisted on the stairs, and both women collapsed, rolled. Finding herself at the bottom, Leslie was horrified at the noise in her head. Then she realized that it was a storm raging outside, and her head was just splitting from the pain. Her shoulder was aching. She tried to stand up, and a sharp pain shot through her thigh. Leslie cried out and fell again. And then, her eyes widening in horror, she watched Lucy rise above her. How could she do that? Both of them had fallen, and this one had fallen like that. The neighbor, continuing to say that she would not let Steve be taken away, threw herself. Leslie realized that she was going for her throat and would not let go. It was painful, dark, incomprehensible, and hard. She tried to fight back, then realized that she had lost. Icy fingers clenched on her neck, her eyes flashed before her eyes, and suddenly Lucy flew backwards. Leslie coughed, blinked, and opened her eyes. Her neighbor was struggling with a tall, black-clad figure. The figure threw Julia to the floor, pinned her arms back, and something connected them, bound them, depriving her of the ability to fight further. And then the figure rushed toward Leslie and brought its face close to her. Leslie, if she had any strength left, would have screamed because the face belonged to the very girl of the portrait. It was that beautiful brunette from the 19th century. It was. Leslie felt like she must be going crazy, because it was a vampire. "Stay still," the fiend said to her. "I'll call an ambulance." "Where are the fangs?" Leslie asked, because she couldn't think of anything else right now. "You vampires should have fangs." The girl smiled. Her teeth were what they called pearly straight, gorgeous, but there were no sharp, dagger-like fangs. "I'm fed up with you interfering. Why do you all come here?" said the beauty irritably. "Steve." "Dial, please," whispered Leslie, feeling that her strength was leaving her and she was ready to fall somewhere. "Were you the one who called us?" The brunette looked at Leslie with a strange mixture of contempt and curiosity, nodded. "So you saved my daughter. Thank you." Leslie exhaled and finally lost consciousness. When Leslie opened her eyes again, she realized that she had been taken to the hospital. Her body, strangely enough, did not hurt, but she felt that she had been badly hurt in the house. Concussion. Lung. Vision will recover. The doctor's voice came through a layer of absorbent cotton. Leslie moaned softly, shook her head, and finally came to her senses. She was in the hospital. At the foot of the bed, a man in a white coat, of course, the doctor. Closer, sitting next to him on a chair and holding his hand, from which a pleasant warmth runs through the whole body, Steve. "And what are you doing here?" First of all, barely opening her lips, Leslie said when she saw Alexander, "You're here for the land, aren't you?" "Actually," the man coughed awkwardly, "to see you. No self-interest, believe me." "Leslie, it's okay." Steve turned to her. "The children are well looked after. Catherine's looking after them." Leslie nodded. Catherine was an old friend of his and also a shift worker at the store. Lucy, Leslie felt infinitely weak and wanted to sleep, but at the same time she realized that she had something to say and something to know right now, and she was afraid to fall asleep, still in the dark. "Yes, Lucy, Steve spoke. "She's in care now." It was clear he was having a hard time speaking. He looked like a man who had aged a few years overnight. "She was the one who set the house on fire back then." "I know," Leslie nodded. "She thought we were. I should have noticed sooner." "It wasn't your fault, believe me," said the doctor, who had some insight into all that had happened. "The symptoms of your wife's illnesses were easy to mistake for normal, problematic personality traits." "Lucy went crazy," Steve finished. "The same thing happened to her that happened to her mother." Leslie didn't know how to find the proper words to comfort Steve. She only squeezed his fingers slightly in response and thought about the fact that he, no matter how bad he felt, would hang in there now. He must hold on for his son's sake. Leslie was now looking at the doctor. She was a little afraid that at the next words, she herself might be considered crazy. "I was saved." "I understand that you need to talk to your friends about something important," the doctor said. "But you can't be overworked for long. And I have to go," he finished and left the room. "It was my sister." Alexander suddenly entered the conversation. "Her name is Sophia, and her appearance, I swear, it was a complete surprise for me." What? "I don't understand." Leslie fixed her gaze on the capital's businessman. She was in shock because she did not understand what was going on. But Alexander, fortunately, had some answers. The small company could talk quietly because except Leslie there were no other patients in the room. And Alexander spoke. "It turned out that back then, in the 90s, John, looking for the right things for his collection of theoretical vampire hunter, not only bought them. One day he learned that a certain collector had what he needed, namely portraits of the last members of the very family, which, as he believed, kept vampire secrets. The collector told the people who came to inquire about the sale of the paintings that they were priceless treasures that were dear to him for personal reasons, and he would not agree to part with them, even if he were offered all the gold in the world. That's when John contacted the bandits. He paid them to steal the paintings, and it was done. The collector was almost heartbroken because he had spent years of his life searching for these paintings. And they were for him not just some works of art. They were directly related to the history of his family, because he was a distant descendant of that very family. His ancient ancestor, the connecting link was that black-haired beauty from the portrait in the ancient style. The noble family announced to everyone that the maiden died. She, they say, carried away by disease. But it was a lie. In fact, she had run away, preferring a love marriage with a poor man to a marriage of convenience with a rich man. That's why she, for such a disgrace, and decided to be removed from the fate of the family and its history. John, of course, did not know that the collector to whom he had dealt such a blow was a person related to those, so to speak, vampires he had been searching for so long. Otherwise, this story could have taken a very different turn. However, this story had developed over time. The thing was that the old collector had a son, whose name was Billy. He left in the 90s to build a business there. The son came back when he learned that his father's health had deteriorated. He spent his last days with his father. He held his hand and listened to his family man's last words about everything being wasted, his most precious possession stolen. Billy was not as passionate about antiques as his father, but he realized that now he just had to find the paintings. These paintings had to return to his family name, and that was it. He had used all his resources, but he hadn't managed to find out anything. Besides, Billy didn't have much time for that. He had to return to America, so as not to lose the business. There he met a woman named Monica and married her. This marriage produced two children, Sophia and Alexander. Alexander, when he grew up, decided to return to his native land and engage in agriculture. He was attracted to plants from childhood. He wanted to work with what grows on the ground. Sophia decided to follow in the footsteps of her paternal grandfather and become a historian. She went to France, then continued her education in England. They had little contact with his brother, and in many ways their views on life were different. So Alexander did not understand the almost desperate desire of Sophia to find the very missing paintings. Yes, he recognized that it was a great loss, but it is, after all, just a part of history, the past. Only his sister didn't want to hear about living in the present. She was stubborn. And about a year ago, she shared the news with her brother. She managed to get on the trail of the man who ordered the theft of the paintings. Sophia learned all about John, and she realized that he would not want to give the paintings, and he would not want to sell them, or even think something bad when he saw her face. The thing was that Sophia had a striking resemblance to the same girl who had long ago preferred love to money and position in society. Sophia knew this because she had seen a picture of one of the missing paintings. Sophia began to plan how to break into John's house and just steal the paintings. She thought she would repay him in kind, and it would be fair. But then John died, and his house burned down. But Sophia wasn't about to give up on her plans. She already knew that John had a secret room and thought that he might have had a cellar under the house, some kind of secret place, in which the paintings could be preserved, unharmed by the fire. Sophia did not want to go to Leslie. She feared that if she refused for some reason, she would not have the opportunity to explore what was left of the house, because Leslie theoretically could begin to keep an eye on this place. That's why Sophia went to the old man's house one night, and suddenly there were children there. She had unwittingly witnessed them dabbling with vampire summoning and had luckily managed to save a girl. And then she decided to return. And again her plans were disrupted now. There were Leslie and Lucy, who had long been following the one she thought was her rival. Alexander said he met with his sister after she saved Leslie. He said he was shocked when his sister told him about her failed plans. But he also managed to change her mind. He convinced her that such a drive to get the paintings back at any cost was not normal, and it would be better to accept their loss. "That's the truth," Alexander said. "Now you know everything. My sister, she's not a bad person. I met with her and talked to her. I think I was able to convince her that the past, it's time to let it go before it goes too far. I can promise you she won't bother you again. She's going back to France tomorrow." Leslie listened to the whole story in silence, and now it was as if she had almost no questions left. But she really wanted two things: to laugh and cry at the same time. "Bunch of idiots," she said, and laughed anyway. She laughed for a long time, and then asked Steve for water because her throat was dry. "Well, I'm glad John didn't find out who your grandfather was," she sighed when she was able to speak again. "And I'm sorry that John, whatever he was, but humanly sorry for him. To be so deluded for the rest of his life. And there was no soul to help him realize that he was going mad. Well, all right, the past is indeed the past. As for your sister," and Leslie told me that no, very much of John's house was not missing. Alexander just rounded his eyes when he heard that, but Leslie did not let him say anything right away and continued. She said that if all those paintings were so important to his sister, then let her have them, for free, because she had no right to demand money for them or keep them for herself. After all, John got them, in fact, in this way. "You're an amazing woman," Alexander said. "I'm just an ordinary woman," sighed Leslie. "He's telling the truth," Steve said. "I picked up some archives." In several newspapers in the 90s really wrote about the theft of paintings from the collector. He tried to somehow find them, appealed to literally everyone who could help. "When did you get here?" Leslie frowned. "You've been unconscious for 2 days," Steve explained, and she gasped. "As for the land," said Leslie, "you know, I'm not selling anything. It's easy to sell, but John wanted to keep it all. So somehow I can do farming myself, not quite bad at it. I live in the village. There are people who will help me. A notary is a good one." "Well," sighed Alexander, "and if the land, which is already covered with forest." "Why do you need it?" Leslie asked in a businesslike tone. "I thought to build a flower farm." "You found time to talk about business." Steve was indignant. "She needs to rest." "You're right," Alexander was embarrassed. "I'll rest," Leslie yawned. "I'll take a nap now. But only let your sister come to me before she leaves for France. Is she in a hurry?" She has a doctoral defense. She's quick, both a scientist and a thief. All right. Can you send the paintings to her afterwards? I'm not sure it will be possible. They were painted in the 19th century. Don't do anything stupid. Leslie had the strength to raise his hand and wag his finger at Alexander. I won't. In fact, I live here all the time, and I think my sister won't mind at all if the paintings just come back to me as my grandfather's direct heir. I think she'd be happy about that. Finally, Leslie got a chance to rest, and then her daughters came to visit her. Emma was serious. Selena cried and promised to always obey her mommy, and then Sophia came to see her. You? Don't tell me I'm an amazing woman. Leslie waved her hands. I can't listen to this anymore. Better, tell me, honey. How old are you? 28. I'm 37, Leslie sighed. I'm sorry if I offend you, but what an idiot you are. No, I can understand the whole situation with John. He'd definitely come at you with a stake, Leslie chuckled. But you could have come to me. I didn't know if you'd agree. If you'd allow me to look around the house, Sophia answered honestly. I realized what I did was terrible. The things I wanted to steal, I just couldn't believe I finally found them. I couldn't believe that I had finally found them. My brother already gave me a hard time. And just because I don't want to give you a hard time, Leslie sighed. But you better get your head on straight, girl, or you're gonna get in trouble one of these days. Promise? I promise. Good. Your brother wants to keep the paintings. I know, Sophia smiled. That will be enough for me. Thank you. You have given our family its history back. Leslie was not disturbed from here on out. She was treated and took lots of long rests. But Steve came every day. And then on the day Leslie was to be discharged, he unexpectedly brought her a bouquet of her favorite flowers. I'm getting a divorce, he sighed. Lucy, she's in rehab. And I don't know how much. I'm sorry, Leslie said. Now you'll be alone with your son. I'll be fine. No, you won't. She added suddenly. I'll be there for you. If you'll let me. I'd like that more than anything on Celine. Two girls stood near the locker room of the culinary college and discussed the celebration of the approaching new year. Catherine immediately told her buddy that she was going to celebrate the event with her boyfriend. Her friend Julia smiled sadly and replied that this time she would celebrate the holiday alone. Catherine looked at her friend in surprise and asked perplexed, You told me only recently that you will celebrate with Austin, and now you said something completely different. We had a fight with him yesterday, and it seems like it's for good. I'm even blacklisted on his cell phone now, Julia said. And you didn't say anything about it in class all day today. I can see that you're sour. I asked you what happened. Why did you tell me? I have to pull everything out of you. Again because of your apartment quarreled, said the interlocutor. Of course, he is already quite naked, almost threatening to force me to sell the property. And I told you that I don't want to do it because we don't know whether we'll have a relationship with him or not. And Austin is sleeping on the idea that I'll sell the apartment and he'll open his own business, Julia said sullenly. You were right to deny him that request. Let him realize his dream on his own, or look, he's the center of the earth. You're right, because if things don't work out with Austin and you sell your place, where will you go? You don't have anyone, and the orphanage won't give you an apartment a second time. And don't feel bad about fighting with Austin. You've already quarreled 3 times for that reason, and you'll see that he'll show up in a couple of days, the friend said. I don't want Austin to come now. I'm sick of being stressed out by his antics. I think he's only seeing me because of the apartment, Julia said glumly. You're in the middle of something. Anyway, if you and Austin make up, that's good. If you and Austin reconcile, that's good. If you and Austin get back together, you can celebrate with us like old times, she said. I celebrated New Year's Eve with you twice before I met Austin, Angelica said uncomfortably. Don't get me started. My boyfriend and I are always happy to see you, said her friend. Catherine met Julia when entering college, and the girls immediately became friends. Classmates and teachers then wondered what could connect these two students. After all, Catherine was an energetic and combative person, but Angelica, on the contrary, she was shy and modest girl. Catherine, when meeting Julia, learned about the difficult fate of a friend. Angelica was brought up in an orphanage. Her parents were lovers of strong drinks, the use of white, and led to their death. Angelica's parents burned to death from carbon monoxide, and with them their 4-year-old daughter. Angelica was saved by the fact that she was at school at the time. After this tragedy, 10-year-old Julia was placed in an orphanage. The girl did not want to live in this institution and asked that her maternal grandmother. And so it was a few days before New Year's Eve when Angelica told her friend that she had reconciled with her Austin. Her friend congratulated her on this event, although in her heart, she realized that the truce would be short-lived, which is exactly what happened. Literally, 2 days before the new year, Catherine learned that her friend in a puff of dust quarreled with her boyfriend. Angelica tried to hold back emotions at the meeting, but could not and just cried and said, "I believed Austin that he was remorseful as he sang me songs with a nightingale that he loved me. I even offered to be his wife, but as soon as I said yes, he offered to sell the apartment. I immediately told him to leave, and in response I heard that I will regret that I did so. Austin has shown his true colors, and he's not worth your tears. Don't you realize that this man doesn't really love you? He only wants your place. And I can tell you more than that. I found a girl from the orphanage who believes pretty words. You can argue with me. I'm not gonna argue with you. You see, you have to know you love this man and only then agree to a truce. Now let's talk about something else. I care about your relationship now, but I care more about your state of mind because the holiday is a few days away. And now I don't even want to hear you talk about making up with Austin. That's your business. But know that my boyfriend and I, as well as my parents, are waiting for you to come visit us. You want to come with Austin or by yourself? And you know, if you say no, I'll be very offended. Thank you." Angelica answered one syllable because she couldn't answer anything else at that moment. Julia spent New Year's Eve at her friend's house. She watched her friend happy with a young man and was happy for her friend. Angelica also wanted to celebrate the holiday with Austin at the moment, but it was no longer possible. The girl a day before New Year's Eve saw the guy with a young woman who he kissed right on the street. Angelica did not expect to see such a picture. For the girl, what she saw was a blow, and at the same time she realized that for her since that time Austin simply did not exist. Winter vacation flew by very quickly. Angelica all this time sat at home and read ebooks on a tablet. Catherine tried to get her friend outside for a walk. However, Angelica found various reasons to refuse and stay at home. The girl could not tell Catherine that she was uncomfortable with her friend and her boyfriend. Julia felt in such cases the third superfluous. Soon the buddies graduated from culinary college. Angelica immediately hurried to get a job. The girl was very lucky. She was taken pastry chef in a cozy cafe, which was not far from Julia's house. By this time, Ekaterina was preparing for the wedding and did not hurry to get a job because she did not want to work in her specialty. Angelica knew about it and wondered why Catherine had gone to culinary college as she didn't want to work. She often asked her friend about it, and now Angelica once again asked her friend, "If you do not like cooking, then why did you go to this college?" "I'm telling you for the 100th time that I had to go somewhere to get at least, so that parents do not pester on this issue. So I went to culinary school. And in general, I know enough to cook at home. As soon as I get married, my husband will need to feed," replied Catherine. "But still need to work. You're not going to sit at home all the time," Angelica said. "This year I will stay at home, take a break from study, and then it will be seen. Especially, you know that my fiancé has very well-to-do parents, and maybe you will help us well in terms of finances," laughing said her friend. "You and John are lucky," Angelica said. "You'll be lucky too, but only if you don't live a reclusive life. You've got a job, and in the evenings at least go out for a walk, instead of reading your ebooks at home," she said. "Well, don't complain. You are in a hurry to marry me off," Julia said, smiling. A month later, Catherine and John were married. On that day, the newlywed, having found the right moment, told Julia about her pregnancy. Her friend gave a joyful yelp and began to shower her friend with congratulations. Then Julia suddenly asked Catherine, "Does John already know about it?" "You're the first person I told. I want to give my husband a present on his wedding night, and you do not tell anyone. I do not even my mother does not know about it," happily said Catherine. "Well, you give?" "I would probably have already told everyone about it," said the interlocutor with a smile. Time slowly moved on. Julia continued to work in the cafe, where her employer was proud of her, as the girl was responsible for her work. And then one day the young woman went home after a day of work. Angelica's thoughts were occupied by the fact that she thought about what gift to make a friend on her birthday. The girl was so absorbed in her thoughts that she unwittingly ran into a young man. Angelica was startled because she not only pushed the man, but also knocked over a glass of coffee. The contents of the cup spilled all over the stranger's snow-white shirt. Julia felt her face blushing red, which was always the case when she got into awkward situations or embarrassed. The girl looked at the young man and could not say anything. She couldn't even squeeze out words of apology. Julia was even at this moment afraid to look at the stranger's face, and at the same moment she heard laughter. Laughing was the man she had just pushed. Angelica looked apprehensively at the young man. The stranger looked at the girl and laughed even more. The young woman looked perplexed at the man and could not understand what made him laugh so much. The stranger, after a couple of minutes, calmed down and said, "Sweet young lady, would have seen your face now, you would have cackled with me. Such a feeling that you have done something wrong and do not know in which corner to hide. Since you're not apologizing, what kind of punishment should I give you? You just ruined my favorite shirt. It was an accident. Let's take it off and I'll wash it for you," almost crying, said the girl. And at the same moment the stranger laughed again. The young woman looked at the young man and again did not understand why he was laughing. The guy could calm down not immediately. As soon as he stopped laughing, he said, "Do you realize what you're saying? You just offered me to undress in the street. Are you going to do the laundry here too? No, you are not boring." After these words, Julia laughed. She realized at that moment that she had said something stupid, and the young man was watching the young woman. The young woman, seeing the stranger's gaze, immediately faltered and asked seriously, "What is it?" "You are just very beautiful," the young man said. The girl was embarrassed by these words. Even her ex-boyfriend had never said such a thing to her, and here a stranger said it. Julia could only say in response, "Don't exaggerate. I was telling the truth. There's no reason for me to deceive you. You know, let's get acquainted. My name is Billy. What's your name?" A man said it. "Julia," the girl replied quietly. "Can I go back to you? I can see you're in a hurry. Let me give you a ride, because I'm already embarrassed to stand in a dirty shirt and catch the perplexed looks of passers-by," said the young man. "I don't know," Julia said. "Then I'll leave it up to you, since you don't know. Come on, there's my car. And don't worry, I'm not going to hit on you," the new acquaintance said with a smile. Julia followed the man without thinking. The couple got into a white-colored foreign car. The man smiled at the travel companion and asked her to tell about herself. The girl was again embarrassed, because in front of her was a complete stranger, and she did not want to tell him anything about herself. The driver of the car, as if read the thoughts of the interlocutor, and grinned and said, "You don't want to tell me, then don't. I'm not going to force you. Let me better tell you about myself. Maybe you will not look at me with frightened eyes." From Billy's story, Julia learned that the man turned 30 yesterday. His parents are only his mother, who went to live in France a couple of years ago, and his father died of a heart attack 6 years ago. Billy lives in a 2-room apartment, has his own business. He was married, but the joint life did not work out, and he and his wife just quietly divorced. Billy told everything so interesting about himself that Julia involuntarily wanted to tell this man about herself. And as soon as the interlocutor was silent, the young woman involuntarily began to tell about her own fate. Billy did not interrupt the interlocutor, but only listened attentively. He did not even know why he wanted to know everything about this girl. The young people did not notice how they spent a couple of hours in the car, and during this time they both realized that they trusted each other with the most intimate of their lives. Julia was the first to realize that she had opened her soul to a man she had just met. She was suddenly embarrassed and said, "How could you do that I told you everything about myself? It seems to me that you wanted to, and there is nothing wrong with that. I like your embarrassment more and more every minute. Let me take you home, but you have to promise to give me your phone number. I don't want this to be our first and last meeting. I won't say more, because you'll think I'm Don Juan, and I don't want that," Billy said. The young woman smiled and nodded. Billy drove Julia home. She dictated her phone number to him and then got out of the car. The girl came home in a pensive state. She thought about her new acquaintance. Julia suddenly realized that her attitude to this man is completely different than it was to Austin. The next day, the young woman thought about Billy and wondered whether the man would call or not. It was the end of the working day, and the new acquaintance had not called. The girl was very upset about it. Billy didn't call during the next 3 days either. Angelica was angry at herself that the man did not call. It seemed to her that it was her fault. Billy showed up quite unexpectedly. The girl was walking home from work. As near her entrance, she saw a familiar foreign car. Julia stopped near the car, from which Billy came out with a bouquet of white roses. The man approached the girl and held out the bouquet with the words, "Here I am. I couldn't call you because I had drowned my phone in the bathtub that day, and your number was there. And then I had some business to attend to. Now I think that you will forgive me for such a long absence, but I promise that it will not happen again. I never thought I'd see you again. How glad I am to see you," the young woman said, embarrassed. "Don't drive me crazy with your embarrassment," Billy said, his voice hoarse with excitement. "I didn't do it on purpose. Do you want to come over to my place?" the girl said quietly. Billy spent that night at Julia's house. The girl was happy in the arms of a man who gave her many compliments and confessed that for the first time in his life, he was experiencing a new feeling, which he had not known before. "Julia," laughing, asked her partner, "do you want to confess your love to me?" "Exactly, but I don't think it's something to joke about," Billy said seriously. "I just didn't expect it because I never believed in love at first sight," answered Angelica quietly. "Now you can believe it. I want you to be my wife. That's the kind of woman I want to have around me as a life partner. You'll probably say I'm saying these words too soon after meeting you, but please believe me. I'm not a man who likes to say words to the wind, and you'll see that soon enough," Billy said. "Let's not just rush into things. I'm really not ready for all this. I feel like it's happening in a dream, not in real life. And if I open my eyes now, you'll disappear," Angelica said quietly. "You won't," the man said affectionately, pulling her to him and then kissing her face tenderly. The next morning, Billy took the young woman to work and promised to call her during the day. Julia nodded in response, although she really wanted to hug the man and not part with him. The girl went into the cafe immediately afterward and then looked out the window where she saw Billy driving away in a car. Julia spent the whole working day thinking about her new acquaintance and whether they would see each other today or not. Billy didn't call until the evening when the young woman arrived home. Angelica happily answered him and couldn't stand it. She asked, "Am I going to see you tonight? Did you ever doubt it? I hope that you are embarrassed again and your face is covered with red paint again," said the interlocutor. "You're a pest," she said with a laugh. Julia was happy with the young man's words. She wanted to see him right away. She thanked fate that she had spilled that glass of coffee on Billy, for that action had been the occasion for their acquaintance. Billy arrived after the phone call an hour later. He brought the girl as a gift a huge teddy bear, which in its paws held a red heart. The man handed the toy to Julia with the words that she now owned his heart. The girl pressed the bear to her chest and said in response that she would cherish the gift. From that day on, the couple never parted. Billy went to Julia's house after his work, and the man came with a small, inexpensive present, which he solemnly handed to the landlady. The girl was delighted with these gifts, but jokingly scolded the young man and asked him not to spend money. Billy, in response, said that he was ready to spend just to see a happy smile on the face of his beloved. The girl told her friend about her relationship with Volodya only a week later. Catherine, as she heard the news, then exclaimed into the telephone receiver that right now will come to visit for all the details. And in fact, in a couple of hours, the young woman was already sitting in Angelica's apartment. The guest looked demandingly at her friend and said, "Come on, quietly, tell me. You know that until I know everything, I will not leave. I can also add that until I see your boyfriend, I will not leave either. Catherine, I must be the luckiest woman in the world because I love Billy with all my heart. I don't even know how to tell you how I feel about him," she said quietly. Then Julia told her friend about her acquaintance with Volodya. The landlady showed all the gifts from the chosen one to her friend. Catherine looked at her friend and saw that Angelica is really fascinated by the new acquaintance. The guest was sincerely happy for her friend. And soon came Billy, who did not expect that Julia would not be alone. The man was a little dazed at the sight of Catherine, and then quickly gathered himself and extended his hand to the girl for acquaintance. The guest looked seriously at her friend's lover and only then responded to the handshake. After this introduction, Julia had already come to her friend's birthday party, accompanied by Billy. They presented the birthday girl with a bouquet of roses and a flower vase. Catherine was touched by the gift and quietly said to her friend, "You haven't forgotten that I dream about this vase." "Of course not, but on the money I would not have pulled myself, so thank my favorite," he financed with a smile, said Angelica. "Yes, you're both of my good guys. Come on, when will you try on the wedding ring?" Catherine said. "All that you need to know." "Don't worry, you'll find out about it first," laughing, said her friend. Soon Catherine gave birth to her firstborn, who was named Maxim. And after this event was followed by a wedding ceremony at Julia's with Billy. At the wedding ceremony came the mother of the groom, and Angelica met with her mother-in-law Inessa. The girl immediately liked Billy's mother. The two women immediately found a common language between them. Angelica was especially happy about this circumstance, as she dreamed of finding a second mother in the person of her mother-in-law, which actually turned out. After the wedding, Julia moved to live with her husband. The young woman, as soon as she moved in, she asked her husband if she could make a rearrangement in the apartment. Billy from this question laughed and replied that now she is free to do whatever she wants, since she became the mistress of this dwelling. And Angelica began to create coziness in the apartment with great pleasure. The young woman quit her job, as it was far to get to the cafe. However, she told her husband that she would soon find a suitable place to work again. Billy did not take this news with much joy, since he liked that he was met at home by a loving wife, who always had time to prepare a delicious dinner by the time she came. So the man said to his chosen one, "And maybe you will not be in a hurry to go to work. I am so pleasant when you meet me, always in an elevated mood. And I'm always going to meet you like this, because I love you," gently said his wife. "I can't argue with you. I want you to be happy living with me. Now I have one more important thing to tell you. You know that my mom gave us a tidy sum for the wedding, and I'd like to expand my business. My 2 outlets are on the periphery, and I'd like to think about the downtown area. What do you think of my offer?" Billy said, "Why do you ask me that? In our family, you're the entrepreneur, not me," said the wife. "That's not the point here. You're my soulmate, and I have to respect your opinion. Maybe you wanted to spend the money on other things. For example, to go to my mom in France or a diamond ring," said the husband seriously. "I feel better walking down the street without diamonds, and we will still have time to go to my mom, because only recently she spent. Let Inessa at least have time to miss us. So honey, I support your proposal. By the way, we can still sell my 1-room apartment, also will be additional finances," with a smile said the young woman. "While we will not hurry with the sale, it is better to rent. And for supporting my idea, thank you very much," said the head of the family. After this conversation was a little more than a month, Julia was going to go to look for a job, as a young woman felt bad. She barely had time to run to the restroom before she threw up. The bewildered girl then proceeded to the bedroom and sat down on the bed. Angelica thought for a few minutes about what had just happened to her, but found no answer to her question. The woman stood up as she felt a bout of nausea again. She quickly ran to the restroom, where once again she threw up. Angelica felt herself becoming dizzy. She realized that the job search was off today, as she was in no condition to go anywhere. Julia went back into the bedroom and lay down on the bed. Soon the young woman was asleep. When Billy arrived for dinner, he saw his wife asleep. He was very surprised, for she had never gone to bed at that time of day. The head of the family quietly approached the sleeping girl and touched her forehead. From this touch, the spouse woke up and looked at the loved one in surprise, and then said, "Was I asleep? And you have any doubts about it?" Question on question answered the chosen one. "I'm sorry, I just don't feel well today. I can't understand why I feel nauseous," she said tiredly. "Maybe you have poisoned yourself." "Although it's impossible, you're my boarder, do not cook," excitedly spoke husband, and then added, "Can we call an ambulance just in case?" "No need. Tomorrow everything will pass. Come on, I'll feed you better, because you don't have enough time for lunch," the young woman said. The next day, Julia's condition did not improve. She was about to go to the clinic for a doctor's appointment when a friend called her to find out how she and Billy were doing. Here Angelica and told her friend about her well-being. Catherine laughed and advised her to go to the pharmacy before going to the therapist. And Julia immediately understood what her friend was hinting at. She thanked her friend and ended the conversation. Catherine was right in her assumption that Angelica got pregnant, as the young woman after the phone conversation went to the pharmacy, where she bought a test. And soon Julia already saw the result on the litmus paper, which clearly showed 2 blue stripes. The young woman was happy. She immediately informed her friend about it, and then called her husband's mother and told her the good news. Julia immediately decided that she would tell her husband the news as soon as he arrived home for lunch. And as soon as Billy entered the apartment, his wife rushed to hug him. The man was surprised by such a meeting. Usually the wife came up and caresses his cheek with the palm of her hand. Billy hugged his wife in response and quietly said, "Tony, what did we have?" "The best thing that could be. Catherine and Mom already know about it. All that's left is to tell you." You are going to be a daddy, the young woman said happily. The man for the first few minutes looked at the chosen one, and then hugged her even tighter and said, "You know how to make gifts. I am happy with your message. Now I will not only have a favorite wife, but also a favorite baby. Now any job is out of the question. You now have to take care of yourself and another life that has been born." Time quietly moved on. Julia, at her husband's insistence, never went to work. She often called her husband's mother as well as her friend. The young woman was happy because she had a loved one, and soon she will become a mommy. However, 2 months before the birth, her husband came home in a bad mood. Julia immediately realized that the spouse, something that bothers. The young woman turned to her husband. "You are not sick?" "No, I'm fine," the man said glumly. "But I can see that you're not doing well. Maybe you can share." The wife said, "A little problem at work. Don't worry about it. Let's talk about something else," Billy said, and at the same moment his cell phone rang. The man glanced at the number and frowned, then went into the other room to answer it. Julia heard her husband talking harshly to someone. The woman couldn't hear what her spouse was talking about, but she could tell that the conversation was unpleasant for her husband. As soon as Billy appeared in the room, she again asked if everything was all right with the chosen one. The man replied only by saying that everything was fine. The next day, Billy came home from work later than usual and again in a bad mood. Julia was now seriously worried. The young woman began to ask her husband what was going on at work. However, the man asked the girl not to bring up this topic today. Angelica did not bother her husband, but she was unpleasant that the chosen one answered her so coldly. For a whole week, Billy came home in a bad mood and answered all the questions of his wife with one-word answers. Angelica was angry at her husband for this, and in desperation, even called her mother to ask her mother-in-law to talk to her son. Inessa, as soon as she found out that Billy had some problems, immediately called him. After talking to his mother, the man turned to his spouse and asked her never to worry his mother about nothing again. Angelica, as soon as she heard this, cried and said, "So you can't worry your mom, but I can worry. Don't you realize that I'm worried about you?" "I'm sorry, my dear. You can't worry either. You're carrying our daughter. Be patient and everything will be fine," said the man. Julia sobbed and at the same moment grabbed her stomach. She moaned. The husband rushed to his wife, and she mumbled in unbearable pain. Billy put his wife on a chair and called an ambulance. A short time later, Julia was taken to the maternity hospital, and on the same day the young woman gave birth to a baby girl who was named Sophia. Billy barked himself very much that Angelica did not reach the due date. He blamed himself for the fact that recently he was not very attentive to his wife. Soon Julia was discharged. Billy met her with a large bouquet of white roses. The man fondly took the tiny package from the hands of the nurse and looked at the face of his daughter, happily said, "Our little girl has taken after her mother, just as beautiful." Now Julia had a new chapter in her life. She became a mom to an adorable baby girl. The young woman with delight babysat her daughter. She liked to bathe the girl, change diapers, feed from a bottle, sing children's songs. All this was watched by Angelica's husband, who was always ready to help his wife. A little more than a month flew by since Sophia's birth, and Billy came home earlier than usual. The man was a little tipsy, which surprised Julia very much, as he was indifferent to strong drinks. The woman, perplexed, asked the chosen one, "May I ask what was the reason for you to come in such a state?" "Just wanted to," said the head of the family gloomily. "I see that you do not have yet and at the same time the mood." Hiding irritation, said the wife. "Can I just go to bed? I have no desire to talk," the man said. Angelica decided that today it was not worth starting a conversation, and it would be better to do it in the morning, when the husband would be in a sober state. The woman took her daughter and began to hum a song to her. She tried to distract herself from the premonition of trouble. Julia did feel a sense of uneasiness in her soul. The next morning, the woman asked her husband to explain about yesterday. The man apologized and said that it would not happen again. Angelica made another attempt to talk to her husband, but the chosen one left the answer. After this conversation, several days passed and Billy came home in an elevated mood. In this connection, Julia's anxious state slowly subsided. The girl was again happy every day and thanked fate that everything was going so well in her life. However, soon everything changed. It happened on the eve of Sophia's 5th birthday. Billy came home and silently walked past his wife into the kitchen. Julia followed him in and looked questioningly at her husband. Her husband never did that. He always kissed her on the cheek when he came home from work, but here he just ignored her. Angelica saw that the head of the family sees her gaze, but stubbornly remained silent. The woman could not stand it and said, "Just do not tell me now that you are doing well. Since you see that everything is not fine, then maybe you will not bother me. I don't want to spoil your mood. I love you. Why don't you just shut up?" Billy said glumly. "You know you've been in such a dark mood a lot lately. I love you too, but you can't do this. Tell me what's going wrong at work," she said frustratedly. "I beg you to be patient. I'll fix everything in a couple of days," Billy said affectionately. Julia turned away from her husband and went to her daughter, who was whimpering in her crib. At the same moment, the young woman suddenly felt an uneasiness in her soul. She turned around to her husband, and he in turn was sitting on a chair and looking at the floor. Angelica calmed her daughter and then approached her husband and quietly spoke. "I love you. Tell me that we are fine." "All is well, on the other cannot be and cannot be," replied the husband. And the next day Julia saw her husband off and told him in the hallway to be careful and said that she was not calm in her heart. The head of the family smiled in response and said that the chosen one is too not cruciality of the situation. Angelica had been worried all day. Her husband hadn't come home for lunch. She tried to call him, but the subscriber was out of range. The woman waited for the evening, but in due time her husband did not show up. The girl did not know what to think. Only about 9 o'clock in the evening a phone call sounded, and an unfamiliar female voice said that her husband was in the hospital. Angelica listened with horror to the interlocutor, who said that her husband had been beaten on the street and he had recently been delivered by a homeless man who had found the man in the basement of a 5-story building. Julia, after this call, called her friend and crying told the news and asked her friend to come. Catherine immediately agreed, as she understood that Angelica wanted to go to the hospital to her loved one, but she had no one to leave her daughter with. The woman told her husband about the attack on Billy and said that she would go to her friend for the night. John immediately agreed with his wife's decision and asked on his own behalf to support his wife's buddy. Catherine called a cab and after a while was already at the palace place. The guest immediately saw that the friend was on the verge of hysteria. Catherine opened her purse and took out from there sedative pills. The woman handed the medicine to her friend and said in an orderly tone, "Until you take a pill, I will not let you go anywhere. You have to be strong now and think that everything will be fine. Drink it now." "I will." "Catherine, I'm very scared," Angelica said crying. "I know, but you have to hold on. Promise me that as soon as you know about Billy's condition, you'll call me immediately. My husband won't go to bed until he knows what's wrong with your husband." "John is worried and told you to hang in there," Catherine said. Soon Julia was at the hospital. She was initially reluctant to be let in at the entrance because visiting hours had long since ended. However, the woman pleaded and almost falling on her knees asked to see her husband. The doctor on duty, who was present during the conversation, took pity on Julia and allowed the visit. From this man in a white coat, Angelica learned that her spouse had 2 broken ribs, as well as a compound fracture of the leg and a concussion. The young woman entered the ward with a rapid heartbeat. She was terribly worried about her loved one. As soon as she saw her husband, who was lying under the drip with his eyes closed, Angelica forced herself not to shriek. She quietly approached her husband and gently ran the back of her hand over Billy's cheek. At that touch, the man opened his eyes and looked at Angelica. He said softly, trying to smile, "My dear, how good to see you. Be quiet, please. You need to regain your strength now. I thought I would go crazy when I was informed that you were in the hospital, but now the most important thing is that I see you and can tell you how much I love you," holding back tears, said his wife. "Don't cry. I won't be able to bear your tears. Everything will be all right, you'll see," said her husband. Julia stayed with her husband that night with the doctor's permission. She told her husband about her childhood. Billy listened attentively, but soon fell asleep. The young woman looked at her husband's favorite sleeping face and thanked fate that her husband was alive after the attack. The girl did not yet know all the details of the attack, but she hoped that the bandits would be caught. Billy was in the hospital for almost 3 months. During this time, Julia tirelessly visited her husband. She already knew that a case had been opened on the incident and that the investigator had repeatedly questioned her husband. But Billy said that he had not seen the attackers and could not give any information about them. Julia did not believe these words of her husband because she knew that on the eve of the incident her husband was in a depressed mood. and that is the only reason why she had a conversation with her husband before the discharge. The woman turned to her husband. "Why are you covering up for the attackers? I am sure that you have seen these bandits in person and it is related to your work. I ask you to start cooperating with the investigation because it may happen again and then the outcome will be more deplorable." "Sweetheart, I didn't see who attacked you because I had my back to those people." "It won't happen again, believe me," my husband said. After the discharge, Billy stayed at home for the first week, which made Julia very happy. She was happy to have her husband by her side and not have to worry about him. However, Billy soon went to work and promised his wife that nothing bad would happen again. But a couple weeks after Julia's man was discharged, Julia received a call from an unknown phone number. A stranger rudely said to the young woman, "Apparently your husband is a complete fool if he hasn't learned his lesson after the hospital. Tell him you're next in line." "Wait, what do you mean me? What do you want from us? I don't know my husband's business. Tony, what do you want from us? I need to know about it. I'm asking you very much," the young woman said excitedly. "And you ask your husband, you are not a little girl," said the stranger, and at the same moment disconnected the connection. Julia looked at the telephone receiver with a shudder. She at that moment clearly realized that her husband is actually in big trouble, about which he kept silent. The woman called her husband, but he dropped the call. Angelica was frightened by this call. She was looking forward to her spouse from work. The girl called her husband every half an hour, but the chosen one kept dropping the call. But soon Billy came home and he was immediately approached by his spouse, who could not hold back tears and said, "How am I to understand you? Why did you answer me? I received a phone call today from a strange man who threatened me. You have to tell me everything now. No more excuses, because I'm scared. It's enough that you've already been beaten up. Do you really want that to happen to me? Calm down and tell me everything calmly. I've had a rough day today." "I apologize," the husband said. Julia saw that her husband was actually agitated and quickly told him about the call. The man listened to her with a frown and then remained silent for a few minutes. And only after that he spoke. "I have a request for you to leave before my mom for a while." "What does that mean? How is it to leave? Never without you. Tell me what's going on." "I'm tired of your riddles," Julia said. "I'll tell you in a nutshell. I'm being forced to pay for a place in the market, and I refused, so they beat me up. But I'm not going to pay, because I don't do it at the marketplaces in the periphery. You see, I don't have to pay someone for nothing," my husband said. "Are you crazy? And you're just telling me this now? I'm just asking you to give up this marketplace. We have enough income from the two places you say are on the periphery. I don't need the money. I need you," Julia said in despair. "Darling, I can't give up my principles. I started my business from scratch and paid no one, so why should I pay anyone now? I just want you to go away for a while I sort things out," Billy said. "No, I'm not leaving you. I made a vow when I got married that I'd be with you always, under any circumstances. You haven't forgotten that, have you?" she said. "Sweetheart, you realize that this is not the moment. I am seriously asking you to go away for a while. I will need literally a week, but maybe a couple days plus or minus. Trust me, please," Billy said quietly. "No, either you and I leave together, or I'll be here. And you've already told me that everything will be all right, and then you ended up in the hospital and those bandits still haven't been found. And with all this you suggest me to calm down and not to be nervous, and just leave you in a difficult moment. You're not gonna get it. I once again ask you to stop this business in the market," said the girl. "I repeat that I will not back down. Understand, my dear, that if I save now, then later I will despise myself for cowardice," said the husband, and then gently embraced his wife. He already at that moment realized that his wife has come to terms with his decision and will not start to bring up this topic again. After this conversation, a week passed. Julia was worried about her husband all this time, and she hoped that her favorite person would be able to settle things in business. She mentally asked the Almighty for only one thing, that there would be no grief in their life with Billy and their daughter. However, the young woman's pleas went unheeded, because just a few days later she was informed that her husband died. Julia heard this sad news on the phone, where a man's voice told her that Billy's car was blown up along with the owner. The woman initially did not believe the words of the stranger who informed her of the tragedy, but when the realization came, she screamed into the phone, "You're lying. Billy promised me that he and I would be fine. Don't call me because you got the wrong phone number. My Billy is alive." Next, Julia just dropped the phone out of her hands and quietly went down to the floor. She couldn't cry or scream at the moment. The woman wanted only one thing, that this phone call would not happen at all. She didn't remember how long she had been sitting on the floor in one position, but she received another phone call, and the same unfamiliar voice said that Julia had to go to the police tomorrow and then to the morgue. The woman listened to all this information in silence and did not answer anything. And only after she called her friend and in a muffled voice told about everything. Catherine, as soon as she heard about the tragedy, then at the same hour said that she would soon come. The woman was very worried about Julia and immediately called her husband, told the sad news, and said that she would go to her friend with her son. John did not object and said that as soon as the workday is over, he will come to them. Catherine, when she arrived at her friend's house, she expected to see her in sobs. However, she found her friend with a detached look on her face. Catherine fearfully began to shake her friend by the shoulders. The guest was disturbed by Julia's psychological state. She at this point only said one thing. "Angelica, I beg you to come to your senses." The landlady looked indifferently at her friend and obediently nodded in response. Catherine realized that the friend is in shock and therefore unexpectedly gave her friend a slap. This blow, as if taken out of a stupor, Julia, and she looked at the guest flooded with tears, and then said, "It cannot happen to me, but it has happened, and I have never sinned in my life. Answer me, why is it happening to me? Who have I crossed the road? Who have I done wrong?" Catherine, in response, only hugged her friend, as she could not say anything. Buddy pinned the sobbing Julia and just stroked her head like a small child. Catherine did not know what words to find at this moment to comfort her friend. Julia soon left for the police, and then the young woman was waiting for a lot of questions from the investigators, and after the identification of the body of her spouse, where she lost consciousness. Angelica came to herself in the corridor, where she was lying on a couch, and next to her was a man in a white coat. The doctor touched the woman's forehead and only after seeing that she had regained consciousness said, "You have grief, I understand, but you need to hold on. Now you need not only yourself, but also your daughter. I answered without your permission the phone that you called. It was your friend. I told her everything. She said her husband would come and pick you up." Julia nodded obediently. She couldn't say anything in response. The young woman did not understand what was happening. She did not want to realize that she would never see her loved one again and would never say a word of greeting to him. And then followed the funeral, which was attended by many people Julia didn't even know. She looked at the people present and couldn't understand what these people were doing here. Angelica even wanted to shout for them to go away. She wanted to be alone for the moment. Next to the young woman stood the mother of the dead Billy, who, as soon as she heard about the tragedy, had taken the first flight to the United States. She cried silently and quietly stroked her daughter-in-law's shoulder. The day after the funeral, Inessa approached her daughter-in-law and suggested that she go with her daughter to live in France. Julia refused. The widow quietly said to her mother-in-law, "Here rests my favorite person, and I cannot leave him here alone. I'm not telling you that right at this moment to leave everything and go away. Let a little time pass, and then move to me. You know very well that I treat you as my own daughter, and except you and Sophia, I have no one else close to me," Inessa said. "Thank you for the offer, but we will stay here. But you can come at any time, as my daughter and I will always be glad to see you," the widow said quietly. 2 weeks passed after the funeral, during which time Inessa stayed with her daughter-in-law. A friend of Julia's often visited them and supported Billy's mother's suggestion that Angelica should go abroad. However, the young woman invariably refused to do so, and so Inessa left and Julia was left alone with her daughter. The very next day, Catherine came to see her and started a conversation about Billy's business. She said, "You refuse to leave with your mother-in-law. Okay, I can understand that, but this is a different issue. My husband and I are worried about you. What are you going to do about the outlets? As time goes on, businesses need to be monitored and managed. I'm going to ask your husband to help me sell. I'm not going to risk anything. I have no entrepreneurial spirit," the young woman said. "You know, I'm glad you decided to do this. And of course, John will help you in this," said Catherine. After Billy's funeral, Julia's mother-in-law died a year later. The young woman felt Inessa's death very much. She loved her late husband's mother with all her heart. After the funeral of her mother-in-law, Angelica sold her relative's apartment in France and on the advice of a friend put the money from the sale of real estate in the bank. Time flew by imperceptibly, and Julia enrolled her daughter in kindergarten and herself went to work in a cafe as a pastry chef. The young woman fully devoted herself to raising her daughter and work. Her friend quite often scolded for the fact that she began to lead a reclusive lifestyle again. Catherine reprimanded Angelica repeatedly. "I understand that you have lost a loved one, but this is no reason to become a nun. Believe me, Billy wouldn't approve of your behavior. I'm sure he's looking down on you from heaven and resenting you. Your late husband would want you to be a happy woman again, not pining for him. You need to take your mind off it and accept that you are now freed of all ties. Stop talking nonsense. I do not need anyone. It is easier for me to live like this when no one but my daughter is not around," answered Angelica's friend. A couple more years passed. Sophia already went to first grade as Catherine came to visit her friend and said that she and her husband are going to move to New York. Julia took the news without enthusiasm because for her friend was the closest person and she did not want to part with her. Angelica, after this message of Catherine, involuntarily wept and sadly said, "You will leave and I will be all alone. As much as I do not want you to leave me, but I realize that your husband has prospects for work in New York. So don't get all wet. You have the opportunity to move to another city too. But you don't want to make any changes in your life. You put on your inconsolable widow's mask and you revel in it. How many times can I tell you that you can't live like this? You are still young. You need to organize your personal life," said Catherine. "Don't lecture me. Now it's not about how I should live. I just don't want you and John to leave, but I realize that it will happen anyway. Let's make a deal so that all the time we will keep in touch with each other," quietly said the interlocutor. "Of course, how could you even think that you and I will stop communicating? Oh, you," mumbled Buddy. And soon Catherine with her husband and son moved to live in New York. The parting of friends was tearful. They promised each other that they would not leave in a difficult moment. Catherine in farewell asked her friend to reconsider her views on life and finally removed the mourning for the death of his spouse, and in response heard from her friend, "Let's not start a conversation with you on this topic again. Let life take its course. I don't want to just rush things." Julia, after the departure of her friend for a long time, could not calm down, that now there is no friend near her with whom she could meet at any time of the day and talk about everything in the world. Meanwhile, time continued to run on. And now Sophia went to the third grade as Julia met a man. It happened at work when she was carrying a tray of pastries to the hall, and a stranger came up to her and offered to help her carry the burden. Julia was very surprised at that moment, but let the stranger take the tray from her hands. Then she got into conversation with a man whose name was Harry. Her new acquaintance met her after work that same day. Afterward, the couple walked around the city and they told each other about themselves. The young woman then thought that perhaps she had everything in her life in connection with this acquaintance will change. However, this did not happen. The relationship between Julia and Harry lasted a little more than a month and soon they parted. And it happened because the man began to demand that Angelica quit her job. The young woman refused, and between them there was a scandal, and then again there was a conversation on this topic, but then Harry raised his hand on the girl. Julia could not forgive this to the chosen one and told him that between them everything is over. The girl would still forgive Harry the last quarrel, but he did not make a single step to reconciliation. Julia told about her failed John to her friend on the phone. Catherine listened to her pal, and after the narration began to reproach Angelica, telling her that it was necessary to humble pride and forgive the man. Julia, hearing this advice from her friend, was indignant and said in response, "How can you say that to me? Think about it. Would you be able to forgive your John if he raised his hand on you? You know, I can't give you a definite answer, as it all depends on in which case my spouse would have taken that action. But I think that John would never allow himself to do it. He is not the kind of person," said her friend thoughtfully. "You see, you've answered your own question. So don't tell me I was wrong to turn Harry down. Let's not talk about him anymore. I don't want to bring him up. I just met the wrong person and Mr. Chance proved it," she said. "I won't argue. But just do not put a cross on yourself after this acquaintance. If I do not listen to me, I honestly promise to go to the seer and ask to do the right that you fell in love," said Catherine's friend. "Do not talk nonsense," in response laughing mumbled Angelica, and then added, "Do not need any shamanok and other psychics. All I will still have happiness and love." Time flew by imperceptibly. Julia still worked as a pastry chef, spent her free time with her daughter, who at that time was already 13 years old. The woman tried to make Sophia grow up a happy girl and often talked with her on various topics. Sonia, in return, carefully treated her mother and did everything in her power so that her mother did not worry about nothing. The girl, for this purpose, diligently studied at school, helped her mother at home in the household. And so Julia went home from work. She thought about the fact that now her daughter is waiting for her, and as always, heats up dinner. The woman involuntarily smiled at her thoughts. She imagined the concentrated face of Sophia, who always did that when she was in the kitchen. Angelica was so engrossed in her thoughts that she didn't notice how she approached the roadway and wanted to cross the road as she was suddenly grabbed by her sleeve. The woman involuntarily flinched from the touch and looked at the man. This person turned out to be a man who said reproachfully, "Madam, when crossing the road, then first look at the traffic light, not counting crows. I've just saved you from certain death." "Sorry, I was just thinking." "Thank you very much, Angelica." "Is that really all the thanks you could give to a savior?" "I don't think it's enough," the stranger said with a grin. "How else can I thank you?" "I said thank you," the woman said, perplexed. "It's not enough for me. I'd like to walk you home." "How would you like that?" the man said. "It's not worth it. My husband is waiting for me at home," Angelique said. "You're lying. You're not married, and I'll tell you why I said that. You do not have a wedding ring on your hand," said the interlocutor. "You have a weak argument to say that I am not married. Most women just don't wear jewelry to work," Julia said with a smile. "I agree that I was being silly about the wedding ring. But I'll tell you, you have the look of an unmarried woman." "The look of an unmarried woman," the stranger said. "Intriguing. And what is the look of unmarried women?" With a laugh, said the interlocutor. "Let me walk you and tell you everything on the way," said the man. "Okay, you got it. Let's go," Julia replied. And after that, the couple followed together to the woman's house. While they were walking, Angelica learned that the savior's name was Archie. He was 42 years old and previously married, divorced a few years ago. The man also revealed that he worked at a poultry farm as a mechanic. Soon the couple approached Angelica's house. They stopped near the entrance and continued chatting. The woman enjoyed talking to her companion, but their conversation was interrupted by a phone call. Julia received a call from her daughter, who asked why she was running late. The woman looked at the time and understood Sophia's anxiety because she should have been home an hour and a half ago. Julia hurried to reassure her daughter and said that she would be there in about 10 minutes. And then the woman looked at the new acquaintance and guiltily waved her hands, letting Archie know that this is the end of their communication. However, the man winked mischievously at the woman and said, "On the first day of acquaintance, I will not ask for a visit, but the phone number will require today. I'm not going to just give up on the girl I like. How fast are you? And if I say that I do not agree?" With a laugh, said Angelica, who liked the interlocutor. "If you don't agree, then you won't get home and make your daughter worry about you," the man said with a smile. Julia did not argue with Archie and dictated the phone number, then headed home. The woman was met by her daughter in the hallway and looked at her mother questioningly. The girl was not used to her mother staying late after work like this without warning. Apologized and immediately said that before he could say goodbye, he already missed her. These words caused Julia to smile, and the woman said, "It seems to me that you are a womanizer. We just met today, and you're already saying such things to me." "What I think, that's what I'm telling you. Now I kiss you gently on the cheek and say good night. Will I see you tomorrow?" "And don't even mind about that," the man said. Julia only wanted to answer, but the caller had already disconnected the connection. The woman looked at the phone with a smile, although the conversation was short, but she was pleased with the attention from a new acquaintance. The next day, at the end of the working day, Julia's phone rang again, and Archie offered to meet. The woman did not refuse, and the couple went for a walk around the city. This time Angelica called her daughter and warned her that she would be late. From that day on, Archie met the woman from work every time, and they walked for a while. And then Angelica went home, where her daughter was waiting impatiently for her. Sophia already knew that her mother had an admirer with whom she was spending time. Her mother had informed her about it. The girl somewhere in her heart was not particularly happy that her mother had a boyfriend, because she was afraid that her mother would pay less attention to her. However, this did not happen, and therefore, Sophia soon calmed down about it. A month flew by as Julia dated Archie, and one day the man at the next meeting asked his beloved a question about when they will start living together. The woman looked thoughtfully at the chosen one and said that she had been waiting for this question for a long time because she was tired of the fact that after work she meets Archie, and then they go to his dormitory where they make love, and after that, she hurries home to her daughter. The man, after the words of the interlocutor, calmly said that then it was time for him to get acquainted with Sophia. Julia proposed to do it at the weekend. She wanted to prepare her daughter for this meeting. Although Sophia knew that her mother had a man, but she had never seen him, but only heard about this man from her mother. And soon the acquaintance took place. Archie bought a cake and a Barbie doll for the occasion. When the man came to visit and saw the girl, he confusedly said to the landlady, "Yes, your daughter is not a little girl, and I brought a doll. It's time to give lipstick and jewelry." "Don't be silly. Sophia is still a child. She just turned 13, so no expensive gifts," Julia said. After Archie and Sophia met, the couple applied for a marriage license. Julia immediately notified her pal about it. Catherine received the news with delight and inquired about the wedding. Angelica immediately warned that the celebration will not be celebrated, but just sit in a cafe. Catherine congratulated her friend and promised to come to visit for a couple of days. Soon there was a marriage ceremony, and Julia for the second time put a wedding ring on her ring finger. Archie immediately moved to live with his wife, his room in the dormitory. He began to rent to have an additional income. The man knew that Angelica has another apartment which she rents. He then still asked why he did not sell the property, and the chosen one replied that the housing will come in handy as the daughter is growing up. But about the fact that the beloved has savings in the bank, Archie did not know. Julia wanted to tell him about it, but she first had a conversation with a friend who told her, "Don't be in a hurry to tell this man all your cards. You've only known him for a week, and you don't know Archie very well yet. I'm not saying he's a scammer or a con man, but you don't have to be completely upfront about it. You live with the man, and then you can tell me all about it." "You know, maybe you're right. I was just gonna tell Vitalik about it, but I don't think he's a bad person. You won't believe it, but I managed to fall in love with the man once again, and I didn't even hope for it," her friend said. "And I told you that it's too early to give up on yourself. You are still in the juices, and give Sophia a brother or sister," said Catherine in response. Time moved on slowly, and a few months after the wedding, Julia found out that she was pregnant. The woman rejoiced at this event and reported the news to her husband. Archie took the news not particularly enthusiastic. He said that at this time to have children is a luxury, as there will be additional costs. Angelica was a bit taken aback by her husband's words and said, "I take it you're not at all excited about becoming a dad." "I didn't say that. You have already put me before the fact that you are in an interesting position, and here I cannot change anything. If a woman wants to become a mother, she will not listen to anyone," the man said. "But you tell me only one thing, that you are happy about this event," said the woman. "What can I do? Of course, I am happy that soon the four of us will be living in a 2-room apartment," said the head of the family. "Yes, do not worry about it. We will exchange this apartment and 1-room apartment for a 3-room apartment. We can even exchange it for a 4-room apartment with an extra payment," Julia said happily. "It's true what they say about pregnant women's minds going the wrong way. What extra money?" Archie said irritably. And at the same moment, Julia told her husband that she had savings in the bank from the sale of her late mother-in-law's apartment. Archie looked reproachfully at his wife and said glumly that he had not expected her to hide something from him. Angelica hurriedly hugged her spouse and immediately apologized for not having told about it earlier. Archie, when he found out how much money his wife had in the bank, he quite pronounced, "That's another thing, and plus you will also get maternity capital. In general, I am glad that I will become a father." After these words, the man looked thoughtfully at his wife for a few minutes and suddenly made a suggestion. "Listen, and let you withdraw a certain amount and give me, and I will then go into business, for example, open a tire shop, and I wouldn't have to work at a poultry farm for a dime. And don't even think about business. I had a husband who was an entrepreneur, and how did that end? He's in the cemetery now. I don't want to hear anything about it. I've already lost a dear person because of this business, and I don't want to experience it again," Julia said nervously. "But your late husband didn't have the entrepreneurial spirit. That's why he ended up so badly," Archie said glumly, not expecting his wife to take his proposal to heart. "Please don't speak ill of Billy. He was a wonderful man. And I'd also ask that you don't bring up the business again. I'd rather we keep living the way we're living now and spend the money on more serious things. For example, buy a car, maybe move to another city," said his wife. "Well, let's not talk about it today. It is better to continue this topic when you have a baby. When you get a penny allowance, you will realize that I was right, and we just need to go into business," said the head of the family. Julia did not reply to her husband's last words. The woman was unpleasant that her spouse was so animated when she learned about the finances. It even seemed to Angelica that her husband was more interested in the topic of finances than the news of her pregnancy. The girl did not focus on this, because at the moment she did not want to spoil her mood. A few days later, the woman registered at the antenatal clinic. She has already told her daughter about her pregnancy, who, unlike Archie, took the news with delight and said that she would be happy to babysit a brother or sister in the future. Angelica informed about it and her friend, who at the same moment began to congratulate her friend. Catherine asked how the news was perceived by the husband. The interlocutor lied to her friend and said that her husband is incredibly happy about it. Months flew and soon the woman went on maternity leave. During this time, Julia got a little better, which did not particularly please her husband. Archie did not say aloud to his wife that her fullness does not bring him into delight. However, the chosen one realized this because the head of the family cool took her in intimate terms. The woman on this occasion is very complex, and she decided to talk to her spouse frankly. Angelica took a moment when her daughter was walking and turned to Archie. "You completely stopped paying attention to me, is it because I have gained weight? Don't be ridiculous. I'm just tired at work, because I need to earn money after all, and our family will be an extra mouth to feed," said the man tiredly. "How unkind of you to call our baby an extra mouth. I'm carrying your son inside me, and that's how you talk. Are you talking about that money again? Isn't everything based on finances? We're not poor," the landlady said. "I'm not arguing with you that we are not poor yet, but it's only a matter of time," said the husband. "Listen, if you are talking about savings, then be patient until the birth of the child, and then we'll talk about it," said the woman. "You mean business?" Archie said more gently. "Yes, but not as soon as the baby is born, but a little later," she said. "That's a different conversation, but it would be a waste of time," said her husband. For the last 2 months, Archie had repeatedly hinted to Julia about the savings, that it was necessary to take advantage of the finances at the moment. The woman, after such conversations, very nervous and asked her husband not to talk about this topic. However, Archie did not seem to hear his wife and still raised the issue of money. A week before Julia had to go to the maternity hospital, the husband again started talking about savings. The woman involuntarily felt a wave of rage that her husband did not want to understand and hear her, and she nervously said to him, "Do you have a conscience? I'm about to give birth, and you're all the time rubbing me. I should not be nervous, and you make me worry with your talk. We decided that after the baby is born, we'll talk about it." "How difficult you are," the man exclaimed angrily and hit the table with his fist. The wife looked at her husband with fright. She had never seen the chosen one behave like that. The woman did not say anything in response and went to the kitchen, as in the back heard the phrase "spouse." "I thought you were a reasonable person, but I was wrong. Do not you notice that we are with you every day more and more distant?" Julia turned to her husband and quietly said in response, "You know, I really regretted telling you about the savings, and we're drifting apart not because of the money, but because of the fact that you may have another woman. Listen, I understand that you have gained weight, but now I have the feeling that your brain is fat," the head of the family said sharply. Julia, hearing this, was shocked. For the first time, her husband addressed her in such a tone and with insults. The woman sharply turned and went into the bathroom. She did not want her chosen one to see her tears. Only after entering the bathroom, the girl burst into tears, and after a while she felt a sharp pain in the lower abdomen. The woman immediately realized that she was going into labor. She jumped out of the bathroom and shouted to her husband to call an ambulance. However, the man was no longer at home. Julia herself called an ambulance and the woman was hospitalized. A few hours later, Angelica gave birth to a baby boy, who was immediately taken somewhere else. The woman asked the doctors what was wrong with her baby, why she was not even allowed to hold the baby in her arms. The doctor told her that the baby was born too weak and with a heart abnormality. Julia saw that the doctor was not telling her the truth, so she said nervously, "Tell me the truth. I am a mother and I have the right to do so." "What can I tell you? Now only the Almighty must be relied upon to keep the baby alive," the man in the white coat said quietly. "Look, you're a doctor. Can you do something for my baby? If it is necessary to take my boy out and operate, I have money and I am ready for anything," Julia said, barely holding back her tears. "You asked for the truth. I told you the truth. Your boy is very weak and cannot be taken out at the moment. Now only a miracle will help, so pray to the Almighty. And I repeat that your boy is very weak and will not be able to stand the road at the moment, the doctor said. Julia went back to the room and there she roared. She could not understand how the doctors could not help her baby. The woman was ready at the moment to give all her savings just to save the baby's life. Only after some time she was able to calm down and then called her daughter and husband. Archie, when he heard his wife's voice, he immediately said that he was already aware of all the events. Julia did not sleep a wink that night. She prayed to the Virgin Mary all night. In the morning, however, the woman was informed that the baby had died in the early morning. Julia wept after the sad news. She hated the doctors at this point, as she had placed her hope in them. As soon as the woman calmed down, a nurse approached her. I realize you are having a hard time right now, but I need to know, are you going to bury the baby? What kind of a stupid question is that? Naturally, yes, Julia said in a detached tone. When the husband found out about the decision about the funeral, he said angrily to her when the woman was discharged from the hospital, "Why are you taking the body of a baby? So many people leave the dead to medical professionals in such cases. Don't you realize that burying a baby is a stupid waste of money? I understand if you had the baby in your arms or if he had already lived with us, but I can't understand your behavior. This is our son, and I'm not gonna give him up. I owe it to the baby to put him in the ground. Although, what am I explaining to you now, when all your thoughts are only about money?" the woman said deeply. Soon the funeral of the baby took place. Julia was crying silently in the cemetery, and her daughter stood beside her, who was also suffering that she no longer had a baby brother. Archie stood off to the side. The man had been angry with his wife since her discharge from the hospital and had not spoken to his spouse. On the other side of Julia was a buddy who had also come to support her friend. A couple days after the funeral, when Catherine was about to leave for home, she decided to talk to Angelica. She turned to her friend with the words, "I understand that it is not easy for you now, and I can see that you and Archie don't get along very well. But right now, I'm worried about your daughter. You know, your family is going through a rough patch right now, and Sophia sees it all. And believe me, it's not easy for her right now. I want you to take the girl with you. My parents moved from here to the country to live. I told you about it. I'm going to visit them with my family, so let me take Sophia with me. It's summer. She'll gain strength. You know that I won't let anyone hurt her. She's like my own daughter. In the meantime, while Sophia is away, you'll sort out your relationship with your husband. You two are in a cold war, and you realize that your daughter should not watch your squabbles, your relationship with each other. She's a modest girl, and she's very worried about you. I don't even know what to say, because I've never been away from my daughter for so long. Yes, and we should ask Sophia, in case she doesn't want to," Julia said quietly. "Sophia, just agree. I've already talked to her. And I'll tell you, your child at least breathes fresh country air, not this gassy. He'll rest and gain strength over the summer. Agree to my proposal," persistently said Catherine. "Since you have already decided everything behind my back, I will not put sticks in the wheel. For Sophie, I do not worry, as I know what a great mom you are," with a smile said the interlocutor. And soon Sophia left with Catherine, and Julia and her husband were left alone. Angelica actually saw that she and Archie were living like strangers. Couple went to bed. Then Archie again amazed the woman. He began to passionately embrace and kiss his chosen one, and then they had a stormy night of love. From that time, the man became more attentive to Julia, and the woman thought that perhaps it was her fault, since her husband was so cold to her. Angelica felt desirable again. The woman was glad that their family again comes peace and harmony as it was before. Summer flew by, and Sophia returned home. Not her daughter Julia, who was surprised to notice that her daughter's angular figure had disappeared. The woman called her friend and said with a laugh, "Confess, what have you done with my child? I sent you a girl, and from you came to me a lovely girl called Sophia. Oh, come on, girl. Your child is 14 years old, and it's high time she became a girl. Yes, and do not forget that she rested in the fresh air and drank everyday cow's milk," said Catherine. Archie came home and saw his stepdaughter. The man also noticed that Sophia had changed for the better after the trip to the village. Archie smirked and approached the girl with the words, "And you have blossomed right in a short period of time, very unexpected." "Thank you," Sophia said, embarrassed. And life went on again. Sophia went to school, Julia and her husband worked. The landlady should have been happy that everything was going well in their family. However, the woman noticed that after the summer, Archie, as if at the stroke of a magic wand, again became rude, cooled in intimate terms. Angelica could not understand these sudden changes. The woman analyzed her behavior, trying to understand why the spouse again away from her. Julia tried to talk to her husband on this topic, and only she asked a question about their joint relationship, as Archie glumly replied that she should take an example from Sophia. The wife looked perplexed at her husband and asked, "How do you want me to understand you? After childbirth, how much time has passed, and you still cannot bring your figure back to normal?" "That's what I'm talking about," frowned the head of the family. "But what does this have to do with Sophia?" "Yes, I have a couple of extra pounds, but they do not spoil my figure." "I don't understand you at all. You started to take to the bottle again," indignantly said his wife. "Don't booze on me, I'm tired," said the husband irritably. A week passed after this conversation. Julia was at work when her daughter called her and said in a crying voice that her stepfather was harassing her. The woman at the first minute could not understand what it was about and asked Sophia again. The girl reported that Archie came in an inebriated state and tried to kiss her on the lips, but she broke free and is now in the yard of the house. Julia asked her daughter to stay there as well and reported that she would be home from work soon. The woman was furious after the phone call. She was coming from work with the decision that she would kick this man out of the apartment today. Julia approached the house and saw her daughter there with a teary face. The woman hugged Sophia and asked her not to worry. Soon they entered the house. Angelica intended to immediately talk to the man and kick Archie out of the apartment. But she was unable to do so because the man was sleeping soundly and there was an empty bottle of white wine lying beside him. This night Julia spent in her daughter's room. She was waiting impatiently for the morning to come. And as soon as the woman heard that her husband woke up, she immediately told him everything about yesterday's situation and then demanded that she was no longer going to live with Archie. At the same moment, the man knelt down in front of the landlady and began to apologize. The man justified himself by saying that he was under the influence of strong drink and did not realize what he was doing. He begged Julia to forgive him and swore that it would not happen again. And after Archie came up to Sophia and also began to ask him to apologize, the girl looked at her mother. She didn't know what to say to her stepfather. She felt a little sorry for the man at that moment. Julia thought for a while and then took the word from her spouse that he would never again drink strong drinks. Archie, in response, made a promise and hugged his beloved. The woman then looked at her daughter and asked if the girl agreed with her decision. Sophia nodded silently. She sincerely believed her stepfather when he asked for forgiveness. After this incident, 10 days passed and Archie actually stopped drinking. He behaved quite properly with his wife and did not allow himself to harass his stepdaughter. Julia breathed a sigh of relief that everything would be all right again. But her expectations were not destined to come true, because soon her daughter called and confused voice said that Archie is drunk and trying to hug and kiss again. Julia asked Sophia, "Where are you now?" "In the next door. I'm afraid to go home," holding back sobs, said the girl. "Calm down and don't cry. This will not happen again. I will now call my partner and ask me to substitute, and then I will put this scoundrel forever out of our apartment, and he will not touch you again. I'm not going to forgive that man a second time," the woman said firmly. Sophia sat down in the entrance on the windowsill and began to wait for her mother from work. The girl waited for an hour and a second, and her mother was still not there. Sophia called Julia, but the subscriber was out of range. The girl looked at the phone with bewilderment and could not understand what was happening. She made several more calls within an hour, but she still couldn't get in touch. Sophia was at a loss as she didn't know what to do. She was afraid to go home because of her stepfather, and she could not get in touch with her mother. And then her phone rang, and she was informed that her mom was hit by a car when she was crossing the road. And the girl was immediately told that Julia died without regaining consciousness. It was later that Sophia and Archie learned that Julia had left work and hurried home and began to cross the roadway in the wrong place, where she fell under the wheels of the car, where the drunk driver was behind the wheel. Soon there was a funeral. The girl sobbed desperately when the coffin was lowered into the grave. She could not believe that now her mom was no longer in this world. Sophia shuddered to think how she would now live her life under the same roof as her stepfather. A few days passed after the funeral. Sophia went to her mother's grave every day, and this day she also came to the cemetery. The girl stood near the grave and, wiping her tears, quietly said, "Why did you leave me?" Now my life has turned into hell and I don't know what to do. I don't want to go back home where this man lives. Mommy, give me a sign from above. How should I go on living? Maybe I should go to heaven with you." And at that moment, Sophia heard a woman's voice behind her, which said, "What are you saying? You can't try to leave this world before your due date. Look how young you are, and you have your whole life ahead of you." Sophia turned around and saw before her an old woman in a black scarf, who looked at her carefully. The girl stood silent and did not know what to say in response. The stranger took the initiative. She quietly but firmly said, "I buried my son here 3 days ago, and every day I see you on this grave. I understand that your mom is lying here and she was buried recently. But now it's not about that. I heard what you said here recently, and I'd like to hear you say why you're complaining so much about life." And at that moment, Sophia suddenly sobbed desperately. The old woman approached the girl and put her arm around her shoulders. The stranger did not try to calm Sophia at the moment. She understood that her interlocutor needed to give vent to her emotions. The couple stood like that for a few minutes, and only after the girl spoke, "I really do not know what to do. And you tell me everything, and together with you, we will think about what to do in your situation," quietly said the old woman. And Sophia began to tell about her mother, about the fact that she was left alone to live with her stepfather, who was trying to get her into bed. The girl spoke confusedly, jumping from one moment to another. The stranger listened to her interlocutor without interrupting or asking any questions. And as soon as Sophia was silent, the old woman said, "My name is Cindy. Now I will ask you some questions and you will answer them. Why did you tell your mom's friend at the funeral? She wasn't there. Uncle Archie said he called her and told her, but Aunt Catherine didn't come. That's strange to me, because they were very good friends," she said quietly. "Then why did you call Catherine yourself?" Cindy asked, perplexed. "The second day after the funeral, my stepfather took away my phone, so I couldn't call Aunt Catherine. I'd love to dial her number, but I don't remember it. I have a bad memory for numbers," Sophia said, almost crying. "So it's all clear to me. Well, and why not tell about the fact that you are molested by your stepfather at school? For example, the psychologist or class teacher?" said the old woman. "To be honest, I'm ashamed and I'm afraid of my stepfather. He warned me if I even a word talk, he will do everything so that everyone will think that I'm a walking girl and molest him," quietly replied the girl. "What a scoundrel, your stepfather. But you do not worry, this man can be nailed to the nail. And now let's do this. You go to my house to sleep overnight. I think that the stepfather will not have enough to worry if you did not come stepdaughter home. I think he thinks you're already under his influence, but we'll prove to him that's not the case," Cindy said. "How are you going to do that?" Sophia asked, perplexed. "We'll come to my house and I'll tell you everything," the old woman said with a smile. The next day, Cindy and Sophia knocked on Archie's apartment. The man opened the door and looked at the stranger and his stepdaughter with surprise. Then Archie said sternly to the girl, "Where have you been, you rascal? I didn't sleep all night because of you. You should be flogged with a belt, so that next time you do not do such things." After these words, the man turned to Cindy and eloquently said, "And thank you, ma'am, for bringing my stepdaughter home. Young man, you and I are going to have a short conversation, but initially, I'd like to enter the apartment, not stand on the doorstep. Although if you want all the neighbors to know about your actions, I can continue the conversation here," said the old woman. "What nonsense are you talking about?" the man said unhappily, but he let the stranger and her stepdaughter into the apartment. Cindy walked into the hall and sat down in a chair, while Sophia stood next to her, trying not to look at her stepfather. The older woman looked at Archie and said rather sternly, "I will not play with you. I understand that you, probably after the funeral of his wife, anticipated lovemaking with his stepdaughter and even rubbed his hands from the upcoming event. Well, I'm only here because I'm not gonna let that poor kid get hurt. She's had enough grief in her life. Her father died in his time, and now her mother has gone to heaven. And you, my good man, you're allowing yourself to abuse this girl. Sophia told me all about how you molest her and try to get her into bed. The girl can lie about a lot of things, because kids are like that nowadays. Every word is a lie," Archie said pompously. "You're a grown man, but you say such platitudes. Listen to me carefully. I've lived enough in this world to believe me. I have good connections, especially my son, whom I recently buried, worked in the police. And I don't have to tell you that if you make a report on you now, the machine of justice will work in full force, and you'll have to take a polygraph and a lot of interrogations. And note that they will believe not you, but this girl," the old woman said sternly. "You will not be able to prove anything," said the man muffled. "You just gave proof that you are guilty. I recorded our entire conversation on a tape recorder. Now stop making a circus out of this. If you don't hear me now, then the next time I will come to you, not me, but the police officer," said the visitor. "What do you want from me?" Archie said in a muffled voice. "Your dead wife's address book. We need Catherine's number. And I want your spirit out of this apartment in a couple of days. And thank Sophia for not wanting to go to the police and report you. And one more thing, don't ever go near that girl," Cindy said firmly. Soon Sophia was on the phone with Catherine, whom she told everything. Her companion gasped as she was completely unaware that Julia had died. Catherine told Sophia that she had been trying to call her friend for a couple days, but her friend was off the grid. At that moment, Catherine could not even imagine that Angelica was not alive. 2 days later, Catherine already came to Sophia. The woman immediately said that she would adopt the girl and take her to live with her. And she also thanked Cindy that the pensioner did not remain indifferent to the child's misfortune and gave her a helping hand. The old woman looked at Catherine and said, "And it could not have been otherwise. I am glad that the mother of this girl has such a wonderful friend. Now I see that no one will hurt Sophia. I think that Julia thanks you in heaven for sheltering her daughter." And then Catherine asked Sophia if she was sure she didn't want to punish Archie. The girl replied that she didn't want to know anything more about that man at all. And then she said in an adult way, "Let the Lord God be his judge, not me. The main thing is that now I will live with you, and I do not need more." "Well, if that's the way you decide, then so be it. And now we have a lot of things to do with you. Adoption, moving, and everything in this way," said Catherine cheerfully.